There is one thought you return to more than any other when money becomes uncertain. It is not the affirmation you speak when you are feeling strong. It is not the declaration you write in your journal on a good morning. It is the thought that is already waiting for you when the bill arrives, when the account is low, when the client does not call back, when the month runs out before the money does. That thought moves quietly beneath everything you say out loud. And according to Wallace Wattles, that thought is not idle. That thought is not private. That thought is not weak. That thought is pressing itself upon the formless substance that underlies all visible money, all visible supply, all visible form. Wattles did not teach that thought was decoration. He taught that thought was instruction. He taught that the formless substance from which all visible things emerge is responsive to the dominant impressions placed upon it by the mind, not the occasional impression, not the hopeful impression made once in the morning and forgotten by noon. The dominant impression, the thought that runs the deepest channel, the thought that is already in motion before you consciously choose it. That is the thought shaping your financial life right now. And before this teaching is finished, you will know exactly what that thought is, why it has the power it does, and how to place a different impression upon the substance from which your supply must come. Consider the thoughts that live beneath your surface when the subject of money arises under pressure. Not the thoughts you choose with intention, but the thoughts that rise automatically. The ones that have been rehearsed so many times, they have become your first response to financial reality. Perhaps the thought is this: money never stays with me. Perhaps it is this: I am always behind, always catching up, always one step away from solid ground. Perhaps it is this: no matter what I do, it is never quite enough. Perhaps it is this: it is too late for me to change the pattern. These are not random fears. These are not momentary doubts. These are dominant thoughts, and they have been forming something. Here is what makes this painful and precise. The viewer who is suffering financially is often not someone who has never tried to think differently. They have tried. They have read the books. They have spoken affirmations into the mirror on Tuesday morning. They have felt genuinely inspired for a few hours after a powerful teaching. But by Wednesday evening, when the pressure returns, the old thought returns with it. The affirmation was occasional, the fear was dominant. And in the invisible economy of formless substance, it is not the loudest spoken word on a good day that forms the mold. It is the thought that occupies the most hours, the most energy, and the most emotional repetition. This is the hidden tragedy of the person who wants prosperity and cannot find it. They are not lazy. They are not cursed. They are not forgotten by source. They are simply running a dominant thought that has been accepted so long, it no longer feels like a thought. It feels like the truth. It feels like a description of reality, rather than an instruction sent to the substance. When the thought says, "This will not work," and that thought arrives before the first step is taken, the mold has already been set, and the formless substance, responsive and faithful, begins to take that shape. The viewer watching this teaching today is being asked to consider for the first time with full seriousness that what they have been thinking is not just a private emotional reaction. It is the primary creative force in their financial life. Wallace Wattles wrote from a place of unusual precision. He was not composing poetry about hope. He was describing a law. In his understanding of the universe, there exists a formless substance from which all visible things are made. This substance is not distant. It is not locked behind spiritual achievement or reserved for the specially gifted. It is present, responsive, and waiting for the impression given to it by the dominant thought of a mind in faith. Wattles taught that a person who could hold a clear, definite, grateful, and repeated thought upon the substance would see that substance begin to move through channels, through people, through circumstances, through unexpected openings, and take the shape of that dominant impression in visible form. What this channel preserves and what this teaching will unfold over the next several minutes is the exact sequence Wattles described between a thought held in the mind and money that appears in the life. This is not metaphor used loosely. This is the operating principle behind the promise of invisible supply made visible through the law of thought. And the reason most people who want this result do not have it is not because the law is unreliable. It is because they have not understood the difference between a thought that visits and a thought that dominates. It is because they have been placing their faith in one law while practicing another. This teaching will diagnose that error and show the precise correction. Here is the promise of this teaching. By the time this script reaches its end, you will understand with clarity why your dominant thought, and not your occasional affirmation, is the real creative instruction being sent to the formless substance. You will understand why a 5-minute declaration cannot override a 5-hour rehearsal of lack. You will understand why the visible world of bills and numbers and circumstances is not the cause of your financial life, but the late-stage result of a thought that was already in motion. And you will have a concrete, honest, spiritually grounded practice for changing the mold through which invisible substance becomes visible money. This is not theory, this is a law, and it is operating whether you are aware of it or not. Look at what is in front of you in the physical world and notice how permanent it appears. The number in your bank account does not look like a suggestion. It looks like a fact. The bill on the table does not look like a temporary form. It looks like a verdict. The client who did not call back does not look like one variable in a field of infinite possibility. It looks like evidence that supply is closing. The visible world is extraordinarily convincing. It uses the language of solidity, of weight, of proof. And almost every person who encounters financial difficulty allows the visible world to become the authority, the final word, the truest picture of what is real and what is possible. This is the visible supply trap, and Wattles named it with precision. The trap is not that visible things exist. They do. The trap is that the mind, trained by a lifetime of looking with physical eyes, assigns creative authority to visible conditions. The money in the account becomes not just a temporary reading but a limit. The employer becomes not just one channel but the only channel. The closed door becomes not just a closed door but proof that all doors are closed. When visible conditions are treated as the cause rather than the effect, the entire law of mind is inverted. The viewer begins to manage their thoughts according to the circumstances rather than managing the circumstances through the thought. Money in the bank looks real, and it is real at the level of visible form. But Wattles was pointing to something that precedes it, something that is operating at an earlier stage in the sequence of creation. Before the money appears in the account, there was a channel that opened or closed. Before the channel opened, there was a perception that recognized or missed the opportunity. Before the perception sharpened or dulled, there was an expectation that either prepared the mind to receive or trained it to deflect. Before the expectation, there was an emotional atmosphere. And before the emotional atmosphere, there was a thought, a dominant thought. The account balance is not the beginning. It is the end of a sequence that began far earlier, in the invisible interior of a mind forming impressions upon formless substance. Bills look real, and they are real. But a bill is not a spiritual sentence. A bill is a visible demand that exists because a chain of physical events produced it. That chain of events is not independent of thought. It was either shaped by the dominant financial thought you have been carrying, or it arrived through circumstances outside your immediate creation, in which case the response to the bill is now forming the next stage. The person who receives a bill and falls back into the thought that says, "I am always behind," is not simply having an emotional reaction. They are deepening the impression. They are pressing the familiar mold more firmly into the formless substance, making the next version of lack more likely to form through the channels ahead. Employers look real, clients look real, income sources look real, and they are real as channels. But here is the distinction Wattles drew that almost no one fully absorbs. The channel is not the source. The employer is not the source. The client is not the source. They are the current shapes through which the invisible supply is moving. When the channel closes, and the viewer's dominant thought is one of wealth, connection, and trust in invisible supply, new channels open because the substance is still responding to the dominant impression. But when the channel closes and the dominant thought is one of fear, finality, and scarcity, the viewer's entire perception narrows to the closed channel and becomes blind to every other opening the universe is already preparing. Debt looks real, and it carries emotional weight that is almost impossible to overstate. To live beneath financial pressure, to carry the awareness of debt through every waking hour, is a genuine and serious burden. This teaching does not dismiss it, but debt in the economy of formless substance is also a late-stage form. It is the visible record of an earlier agreement between the mind and the idea of lack. It was formed through channels shaped by thought, and it can only be transformed by changing the dominant thought that continues to press its shape into the substance from which the next season of supply must come. Dealing with debt by staring at debt and rehearsing fear is like trying to change the shape of poured metal by staring at the mold after the metal has already set. The work must happen earlier, at the level of the thought. Thought seems weak because it is invisible. This is the perception that stops the law from working in the lives of thousands of people who intellectually believe in it. They see money and think it is strong. They see thought and think it is soft. They speak affirmations quietly while the debt speaks loudly. They hold an intention for a moment while the circumstances hold their weight for hours. And so the balance of impressions remains in favor of the visible world, and the visible world continues to reproduce itself. Wattles was asking for a radical reorientation. He was asking the viewer to recognize that visible form is the weakest point in the chain of creation, not because it is unimportant, but because it is already finished. The only point at which change can be introduced is at the level of thought before the form is complete. But visible form is the late-stage reality. What is visible has already been through the full sequence of impression, atmosphere, expectation, and channel formation. It is no longer fluid, it is set. And this is the essential reason why changing visible circumstances by manipulating only visible conditions is such hard, exhausting, and often fruitless work. The person who borrows to cover lack while still holding a dominant thought of scarcity has only rearranged the visible form without changing the formative impression. The next cycle will produce the same shape because the mold has not changed. Wattles pointed to the mold. He pointed to the thought. He pointed to the one place in the sequence where the viewer has full authority and where the law is fully ready to respond. There is a thought you are being asked to adopt and hold as you move through this teaching, not as decoration, not as spiritual posturing, as a genuine statement of the law you are beginning to understand and accept. If you are ready to treat your dominant thought as a creative instruction, as a real force pressing itself upon the formless substance from which your supply must come, then leave this word in the comments as your declaration and your commitment to the law. Comment this phrase now. My thought becomes form. This is not a casual comment. It is an agreement. It is the moment you stop treating your inner life as a private shadow with no consequence and begin treating it as the primary creative authority in your financial world. Every person who comments that phrase is not simply engaging with a video. They are performing a shift in orientation. They are saying with intention and awareness that the thought I hold is not separate from the money that comes. It is the mold from which the money must emerge. Comment it now, and let it become the anchor of everything you receive from this teaching. The cost of an unguarded dominant thought is not abstract. It is paid in real emotional currency over days, months, and years of a life that never quite reaches the level the viewer knows is possible. The first and most constant cost is repeated financial fear. Not occasional worry, but the kind of chronic background anxiety that makes every financial interaction carry an undertone of dread. The person whose dominant thought is one of lack does not simply worry when the bill arrives. They worry in advance of the bill. They worry while the money is still present. They worry even when circumstances seem temporarily stable, because the dominant thought does not require a visible trigger. It is always there, just beneath the surface, ready to rise at the first invitation. The second cost is contradictory action. When the dominant thought is one of scarcity and fear, every action taken toward wealth is immediately undermined by the inner atmosphere from which it springs. The viewer may make the call, but the call carries the energy of doubt. They may make the offer, but the offer is priced from fear. They may take the step, but the step is accompanied by the anticipation of failure. Wattles taught that action must embody the dominant thought to be genuinely effective. Action taken from a thought of wealth carries one quality. The same visible action taken from a thought of lack carries an entirely different quality. And the quality of the action shapes the quality of the response it receives. The third cost is low expectation. And this is where the damage becomes systemic. A person whose dominant thought is one of lack does not simply lack money. They lack expectation of money. And expectation is the inner faculty that opens perception to channels and opportunities. The person with high wealth expectation walks into a room and sees possibilities. The person with low expectation walks into the same room and sees obstacles. The channels through which supply can flow do not change. The inner state that determines whether those channels are perceived changes. Low expectation, sustained by a dominant thought of scarcity, makes the viewer systematically blind to the very openings source is providing. The fourth cost is undercharging. This one is specific, practical, and deeply connected to the dominant thought. The person who believes at the level of dominant thought that they do not deserve substantial money, or that the amount they want is not realistic, or that asking for more will cause rejection, will consistently price themselves below their value. Not because the market has made this decision, because the inner mold has made it. They will lower the price before being asked. They will apologize for the offer. They will make the deal smaller in advance, out of a fear the dominant thought has already planted. The world will respond to this as though it were the viewer's honest declaration of worth, because in the economy of formless substance, it is. The fifth cost is panic decisions. When money feels uncertain and the dominant thought is one of fear, the mind demands immediate visible relief. It rushes toward the fastest visible exit from discomfort. It accepts conditions it would not accept from a state of wealth thought. It agrees to arrangements that diminish rather than grow. It breaks the patient, deliberate, faith-centered process that Wattles described and substitutes anxious improvisation. Panic decisions are the visible evidence of a dominant fear thought under pressure. Every time the viewer has looked back at a financial decision made in panic and recognized it as a mistake, they were seeing the direct output of an unguarded dominant thought operating at the moment of highest emotional intensity. The sixth cost is resentment. This is the emotional toll of watching others receive what the viewer believes they cannot have. The person with a dominant poverty thought does not simply experience lack, they experience the pain of contrast. Every wealthy person they see becomes a reminder of what appears to be unavailable. That resentment, which feels like a reasonable emotional response, is also a thought form. It is an active signal being sent to the substance. And its message is this: wealth belongs to others, not to me. The substance does not evaluate the fairness of this thought. It simply responds to it as an impression, as a mold, and begins forming more evidence to confirm it. The seventh cost is shame. Shame is the internalization of the poverty thought as identity. When lack continues long enough, the dominant thought does not only describe a financial condition, it begins to describe the person. The viewer stops thinking, "I do not have money right now," and starts thinking, "I am the kind of person who does not have money." This is the point at which the dominant thought has achieved its deepest penetration. It is no longer a situational assessment. It is a self-definition. And self-definition is the most powerful mold of all, because it presses itself upon the substance not only in moments of financial stress, but in every quiet moment, every spontaneous decision, every subtle choice about what to attempt and what to avoid. The eighth cost is fatigue. The person who has been rehearsing lack for months or years, while also trying to affirm and hope and act, is exhausted in a very particular way. They are exhausted by the contradiction. They are spending enormous energy trying to maintain a positive surface, while the dominant thought beneath it runs continuously in the other direction. This internal split is genuinely tiring. The relief that Wattles' teaching offers is not just financial. It is the relief of ending the contradiction. When the dominant thought and the spoken word and the action are all aligned with wealth, the person no longer has to hold two opposing realities simultaneously. They move into coherence, and coherence releases energy that fear had been consuming. The ninth cost is missed doors. This is perhaps the most invisible cost of all, because it does not appear in the ledger as a loss. It simply never appears. The opportunity that arrived but was not perceived. The conversation that could have opened a channel but was dismissed. The idea that rose but was immediately suppressed. The offer that came but triggered fear instead of readiness. These are the doors the dominant thought closes before they are ever consciously evaluated. Wattles taught that the substance moves toward the dominant impression through channels, and that the mind must be open to unexpected channels. But the mind, whose dominant thought is one of lack, has already decided beneath the surface of conscious reasoning that no real door will open, and so the door opens and passes unseen. The 10th and most comprehensive cost is the recreation of old patterns while blaming circumstances. This is the quiet tragedy at the center of financial suffering for people who genuinely want more. They change the visible circumstances again and again. They change the job, they change the city, they change the partner, they change the strategy. And the same financial pattern reappears in the new circumstances because the dominant thought traveled with them. The mold was never changed. Only the material poured into it changed, and a different material poured into the same mold produces the same shape. Wattles taught this with clarity. The outer world is an extension of the inner mold. Change the mold, and the outer world must eventually change. Leave the mold unchanged, and no arrangement of outer circumstances will produce a lasting different result. Wattles taught that the universe contains a thinking substance from which all visible things are made, and that this substance is not fixed or finished. It is alive, responsive, and waiting to take the shape of the dominant impression placed upon it by a mind aligned with the source behind all creation. This is the beginning of the law, and it is essential to hold it clearly before the rest can be understood. The substance is not separate from your thought. It is in continuous relationship with it. Every dominant impression you place upon it is received and begins the process of moving toward visible form through whatever channels are available in your world. Thought gives shape to this formless substance. Not just any thought. Not the casual, scattered, distracted thinking that runs through the mind in ordinary hours, but a thought that is held with definite clarity, returned to with consistency, and felt with the kind of quiet certainty that Wattles described as faith. When a person forms a clear and definite thought about the financial life they are claiming, they are giving the substance a mold. They are telling the invisible creative power not just that they would like something, but what form they require it to take. The specificity of the thought, its clarity, its definiteness, is part of what determines how clearly the substance is able to respond. Definite thought gives direction. This is a principle Wattles returned to repeatedly throughout his writing. A vague wish does not impress the substance in the way a definite thought does. The person who thinks, "I would like more money somehow," is not giving the substance a mold. They are giving it an atmosphere of dissatisfaction without a clear creative direction. But the person who thinks, with certainty and specificity, about the form of supply they are calling forth, about the quality of their financial life and the provision they are receiving from source, is pressing a definite shape into the substance. Definite thought is not demanding or grasping. It is clear. And clarity is the beginning of form. Faith gives life to the thought. Wattles was precise about this. A thought without faith is a mold without heat. The form cannot solidify. Faith, in Wattles' understanding, is not the performance of certainty when you feel afraid. Faith is the choice to maintain the dominant impression despite the visible world's contradiction, because you understand the law that governs invisible supply. It is the knowing that the substance responds to the dominant thought, and the refusal to allow visible circumstance to become the final authority over what is real. Faith is what keeps the mold in place long enough for the substance to take its shape and move through visible channels. Gratitude stabilizes the mold. This teaching from Wattles is often misunderstood as pleasant spiritual advice. It is actually a precise instruction about the mechanism of thought formation. When the mind is in genuine gratitude, it is oriented toward what is present, what is good, what is working, what has been provided. That orientation maintains an atmosphere of abundance even when visible supply is incomplete. And that atmosphere of abundance is itself a dominant impression. It presses into the substance a signal that supply is real, that provision is active, that wealth is already present in some form. Gratitude does not deny the bill. It refuses to let the bill become the dominant thought. It holds the wealth impression steady even while the visible world is still catching up. Action gives embodiment to the thought. This is where Wattles separated his teaching from passive wishing. He was not describing a law of idle visualization. He described a law in which the thought is active, the faith is firm, the gratitude is genuine, and the action is taken in the certain way. Action in the certain way means taking the steps that become visible from the standpoint of the wealth thought. It means responding to open doors with movement rather than hesitation. It means making offers from a place of value rather than fear. It means continuing to act as though the supply is real even when it is not yet visible. Because the law says that action aligned with the dominant thought embodies that thought in the visible world and accelerates the channel formation through which supply will flow. Repetition strengthens the impression. A thought visited once is a light touch upon the substance. A thought returned to with consistency, felt with clarity and spoken with intention, is a deep and enduring impression. This is why Wattles did not describe a one-time mental event as the creative mechanism. He described a sustained, chosen daily orientation of the dominant thought. The person who returns to the wealth thought each time the fear thought rises, who chooses it again after every pressure moment, who builds through faithful repetition a mental atmosphere of receiving and increase, is pressing an ever-deepening mold into the formless substance, and the substance responds to the depth of the impression. Dominant thought becomes formative. This is the summary of everything Wattles was building toward, not positive thinking, not occasional affirmation, not hopeful wishing. Dominant thought, the thought that rules the inner atmosphere, the thought that shapes the response to every financial event, the thought that is already present when the bill arrives, when the account drops, when the opportunity knocks, when the unexpected channel appears. That thought is the mold. And the money that comes into the viewer's life, the channels through which it moves, the amount it settles at, the ease or the difficulty of receiving it, all of these are shaped by the dominant thought pressing itself into the formless substance from which all visible supply must emerge. Here is the belief that must be broken before this law can work in your life. The belief is this: thinking about wealth is not practical. It is a luxury for people who already have enough. What matters is the action, the strategy, the visible effort, the practical plan. Thought is what you do after you have dealt with the real problems. Thought is what happens in the background while the serious work of money-making goes on in the visible world. This belief is widespread, sincere, and almost perfectly designed to prevent the law from functioning. Because the law requires that thought be treated as the first cause, not the afterthought. Every action you have ever taken toward money began in thought. Every decision you have made about money was shaped by the atmosphere of a thought. Every conversation you have had about your financial situation was filtered through the dominant thought running beneath your surface awareness. The thought is not separate from the action. The thought is the quality from which the action is formed. Two people can take the identical visible action, and the action of the one whose dominant thought is wealth will carry an entirely different quality, a different authority, a different openness, than the same action taken by the one whose dominant thought is fear. The thought is not outside the practical world. The thought is the invisible architecture of every practical moment. Consider the thought you bring to a price negotiation. The person whose dominant thought is wealth approaches that conversation with an inner certainty that their value is real, that supply is not scarce, and that the right arrangement will appear. The person whose dominant thought is scarcity approaches the same conversation already prepared to accept less, already half apologizing for asking, already shrinking before any resistance has arrived. The negotiation has not yet happened. The outcome has already been shaped by the thought that was dominant before the first word was spoken. This is not metaphysical speculation. This is the law operating in the most ordinary visible interaction. The thought you live from is more practical than the plan you write from fear. A plan built from a poverty thought carries the poison of that thought into every line. The projections are too small. The offers are too cautious. The vision is trimmed to what the fearful mind believes the universe will allow. A plan built from a dominant wealth thought carries a different quality entirely. The vision is honest. The offer is clear. The expectation is real. The action steps align with a genuine belief that supply is available and that the source is moving to fulfill the dominant impression. The plan is the same kind of document, but the thought from which it emerged determines everything about its power. Dominant thought determines the state from which all practical action flows. This is the precise teaching, and it disrupts the belief that separates thought from practicality as completely as any teaching in the Wattles tradition. When you understand this, you stop treating thought as a soft secondary consideration and start treating it as the primary work. The practical work of guarding the dominant thought becomes more important than any visible strategy, because the dominant thought is what determines the quality, the direction, and the spiritual authority of every visible strategy that follows from it. The strategy serves the thought does not serve the strategy. Here is what this means in the specific context of financial fear. When the bill arrives and the fearful mind says, "I need to figure this out right now," what it means in practice is, "I need to act from my dominant thought right now." And if the dominant thought is one of scarcity, every action taken in that moment will carry scarcity into the visible world. But if the viewer has been building a dominant wealth thought through consistent return, faithful repetition, and grateful orientation, then when the pressure arrives, the response that rises first is not panic, but a quiet, firm knowing that source is not finished, that channels are still forming, and that the right action from the right thought will be clearer than any action taken from fear. That is the practical superiority of dominant thought. That is why Wattles placed it at the beginning of the certain way. Notice what happens when you bring a thought of genuine confidence to a conversation you would normally approach with anxiety. You speak differently, you hold yourself differently, you listen for opportunity rather than scanning for rejection. The other person in the conversation responds to a different version of you, a version shaped by the dominant thought you brought into the room. And the outcome of the conversation reflects that. This is not supernatural. This is the law operating through the perfectly ordinary mechanics of human interaction, perception, and response. The thought shapes the inner state. The inner state shapes the quality of action. The quality of action shapes the response from the visible world, and the response from the visible world becomes the next visible circumstance. Change the thought and you change the entire chain. The final disruption is this. The viewer who has been treating thought as weak, private, and irrelevant has not been living in a neutral space. They have been living under the rule of a default dominant thought, usually one installed by years of financial pressure, cultural messaging about money and worth, and repeated experiences of visible limitation. That default thought has been functioning as the creative instruction all along, not because they consciously chose it, but because thought does not require your permission to impress itself upon the substance. It does so automatically. The only question is whether you will now choose your dominant thought deliberately or continue to allow the default thought of fear to set the mold from which your next season must emerge. Wattles gave you the choice. This teaching is asking you to take it. Later in this teaching, we will reveal something that most viewers already suspect, but have not been able to fully accept. We will reveal why a 5-minute affirmation cannot defeat a 5-hour rehearsal of lack. Why the positive statement you make in the morning is so often overwhelmed by the returning thought that arrives by midday. Why the intention you set with genuine sincerity at the beginning of the week dissolves under the first real financial pressure. This is the question at the center of why so many sincere, spiritually aware people affirm wealth in one breath and recreate lack in the next. And the answer is not more discipline or more positive thinking. The answer is understanding the specific law of dominant thought and how it operates differently from occasional thought. The issue is not whether you have positive thoughts. Most people who are drawn to this kind of teaching do. They have hopeful thoughts, inspired thoughts, occasional moments of genuine clarity about what is possible. The issue is what thought dominates. The issue is what thought holds the most hours, the most emotional energy, the most automatic authority in the moments when no one is watching and nothing external is reinforcing the positive. Positive thoughts visit. Dominant thoughts build. And the building function, the formative function, the function that presses the mold into the substance, belongs to the dominant thought alone. A visiting thought is like a light footprint in soft ground. A dominant thought is like a foundation poured repeatedly in the same place until the structure it supports is permanent. Affirmation without dominance is weak. This is the hard teaching that the popular versions of prosperity thinking have largely avoided, because it requires a level of honest self-examination that is less comfortable than a simple spoken ritual. You can speak an affirmation with full sincerity and still have that affirmation make no lasting impression on the substance if the thought you return to automatically, the thought that occupies the hours between your conscious spiritual practice, is running in the opposite direction. The affirmation touches the surface, the dominant thought owns the depth, and the substance responds to depth, not surface. Fear repeated with feeling becomes instruction. This is the correction to the common spiritual confusion that says, as long as I say the right words, I am planting the right seeds. Wattles was not describing a law of spoken words exclusively. He was describing a law of dominant thought, of the thought that carries the most emotional repetition, the most genuine feeling, the most consistent return across the hours of the day. And the painful truth is that for many viewers, the thought they return to most often is the fear thought, because fear is urgent, because the visible world continuously reinforces it, because the bill is louder than the affirmation. Fear spoken aloud, fear rehearsed in the mind, fear returned to with feeling, is also an impression on the substance. It is also a mold. It is also an instruction, and it produces form. The viewer must identify the returning thought, not the thought they choose when they are feeling strong, but the thought that arrives without invitation when the financial pressure rises. The thought that is already waiting when the account drops. The thought that rises in the quiet of the night when the mind scans the future and cannot find solid ground. That thought is the returning thought. It is the one being repeated with the most feeling in the most unguarded moments. It is the one the substance is receiving most consistently as the dominant impression, and it is the one this teaching is asking the viewer to identify, examine, and replace, not with a surface affirmation, but with a genuinely chosen and repeatedly returned to wealth thought. The returning thought is the mold. This is the open loop that will be fully resolved later in this teaching, but it must be planted now so that everything that follows is evaluated against it. Every analogy, every practice, every corrective instruction in the sections ahead is designed to answer one central question. How do you change the returning thought from a fear mold to a wealth mold? How do you take the thought that rises automatically under pressure and replace it with a thought that impresses prosperity upon the formless substance with the same consistency and emotional depth that fear has been using? The answer exists. It is precise, and Wattles described it. But before it can be applied, the viewer must understand exactly how the invisible mechanism works, exactly how thought becomes money through the unseen chain of impression, atmosphere, expectation, and channel formation. That understanding begins now. The most important spiritual question you can ask about your financial life is not, "What should I do?" It is not, "How can I find more money?" It is this, "What thought do I return to?" Answer that question honestly, and you will have identified the real cause behind every visible financial pattern you have been trying to change through visible means. The returning thought is operating beneath your strategy. It is setting the atmosphere in which your actions are born. It is determining the quality of expectation with which you approach every conversation, every offer, every opportunity. And until it is identified, examined, and deliberately replaced with a chosen wealth thought, no visible rearrangement will produce a lasting different result. The mold must change, and the mold is the returning thought. The law that Wattles described is not selective. It does not work only for the spiritually advanced or only for those who have already achieved some visible success. It works for whoever impresses it most consistently with whatever they think, which means it is already working in your life. The only question is whether it is working through a fear mold you inherited and never examined, or through a wealth mold you have chosen and are building with intention. The entire purpose of this teaching is to move you from the first to the second, not by denying the visible world, but by understanding that the visible world is the last stage of a process that begins in the invisible, in the dominant thought, pressing itself upon the formless substance from which all visible supply must come. Thought begins as image. When the mind forms a dominant thought about wealth and supply, it is not simply registering an abstract verbal statement. It is creating an inner image of a financial reality. This image may not be vivid in the way of a deliberately constructed visualization. It may be more like a felt sense of what the financial life looks like from the inside, a quality of having, a posture of receiving, a knowing that supply is present and flowing. This image, whether consciously crafted or automatically formed through years of dominant thought, is the beginning of the chain that moves invisible substance toward visible money. The image is the first imprint on the formless. Image becomes emotional atmosphere. The inner image of wealth does not remain neutral and cognitive. As it is held and returned to, it generates a corresponding emotional tone. The person whose dominant thought is one of increase and receiving gradually builds an inner atmosphere of expectation, of openness, of readiness to receive. This atmosphere is not performance. It is not the forced cheerfulness of someone pretending everything is fine. It is the deep, settled quality of a mind that has oriented itself toward abundance with enough consistency that the orientation has become the prevailing emotional weather. That atmosphere pervades every action, every conversation, every decision the person makes. It is felt by others before a word is spoken. Atmosphere becomes expectation. When the emotional atmosphere of wealth becomes genuinely dominant, it gives rise to expectation, and expectation is one of the most practically powerful forces in the chain from invisible to visible supply. Expectation changes what the mind looks for. It changes what the mind notices. It changes what the mind is prepared to receive. The person who truly expects supply does not need it to come through a specific visible channel in order to remain open. They are expecting it generally from source, through whatever channel the substance decides to move. This broad, trusting expectation is itself a signal to the formless substance, confirming that the dominant impression is stable and clear. Expectation shapes perception. Here is where the invisible mechanism becomes most concretely connected to the visible world. Perception is not neutral. What the mind expects, it is primed to notice. What the mind has trained itself to believe is unavailable, it consistently fails to register. The person with a dominant poverty thought walks through life with a perceptual filter set to find evidence of lack, of closed doors, of why things will not work. The person whose dominant thought has shifted to wealth walks through the same life with a perceptual filter set to find channels, openings, unexpected paths, and reasons to move forward. The visible world has not changed. The perceptual apparatus has changed, and through that change, the invisible substance begins to appear as visible opportunity. Perception notices channels. When expectation has opened the perceptual field, the mind begins to notice channels that were invisible before the shift. A conversation becomes an opportunity that once would have been passed over as irrelevant. An idea that would have been dismissed as impractical gains a second, more open consideration. A person who enters the viewer's life begins to be recognized as a possible channel of supply rather than dismissed because they do not fit the preconceived image of how money should arrive. The channels have always been present. The invisible substance has always been moving through them. What changes with the dominant thought is the ability of the prepared mind to perceive and respond to what the source has already placed in the path. Channels invite action. The perceived channel does not force the viewer to step through it. It invites. And here is where Wattles' insistence on action becomes essential. The dominant thought opens the perception. The perception reveals the channel. The channel invites movement, and the movement, the faithful step taken through the open door, is what embodies the dominant thought in the visible world and draws the supply through the channel into visible form. Without the action, the channel may close. Without the dominant thought, the action will not be taken in the certain way that makes it effective. The chain requires every link: thought, image, atmosphere, expectation, perception, open channel, faithful action, visible form. Action creates visible form. This is the end of the sequence that began with the dominant thought. The money that appears, the provision that arrives, the unexpected supply that comes through a channel. the calculating mind could not have predicted, is the visible end of a chain that began in the invisible with a thought. This is what Wattles meant when he taught that a person can think themselves rich. Not that thought alone without action produces money by magic, but that thought, held dominantly, creates the atmospheric, perceptual, and motivational conditions through which the right action is taken in the right moment through the right channel, and through which the formless substance takes the shape of the dominant impression in the visible world. Repeated thought strengthens the chain. Every time the dominant wealth thought is chosen again after the fear thought rises, every time the viewer returns to the inner image after the visible world attempts to break the mold, every time the emotional atmosphere of receiving is rebuilt after panic has disrupted it, the chain grows stronger. The impression on the substance deepens. The perceptual filter becomes more reliably oriented toward channels. The readiness for action becomes more immediate. This is why Wattles emphasized consistency over intensity. A brief moment of inspired thought, followed by hours of fearful thought, does not produce a strong impression. A consistently held, repeatedly returned to, faithfully maintained wealth thought presses the deepest and most enduring mold. Scattered thought weakens it. When the viewer's dominant thought fluctuates wildly between wealth and poverty, between trust and fear, between the received vision and the returning doubt, the chain becomes fragmented. The image forms and then dissolves. The atmosphere rises and then collapses. The expectation opens perception briefly, and then fear closes it again. The channels begin to appear, and then the viewer's doubt makes them invisible once more. Scattered thought does not give the substance a consistent mold to respond to. It gives it a series of contradictory impressions that partially cancel each other, reducing the clarity of the form that the substance is trying to bring into visibility. Dominance is what the law requires, not perfection, but dominance. Contradictory thought reverses it. This is the sharpest edge of the teaching. When the viewer affirms wealth in the morning and rehearses poverty for the rest of the day, the net impression moving toward the substance is still poverty, because poverty held the dominant position in the hours of the day. And when contradictory thought runs deep enough, long enough, and with enough emotional investment, it does not simply weaken the chain, it reverses it. The substance begins forming around the dominant impression of lack. The channels that were opening begin closing, not because source has abandoned the viewer, but because the dominant thought is no longer pointing toward the open door. The substance is faithful to the dominant impression. Change the dominant impression, and the substance changes its direction. The substance responds to dominant impression. This is the summary of everything the invisible mechanism reveals. The formless substance from which all visible money must emerge is not indifferent to your thought. It is not neutral, it is responsive. And it responds to the thought that dominates, the thought that holds the most hours, the most feeling, the most consistent return across the days and weeks of your financial life. Not the thought you say at your best, the thought you return to under pressure, the thought that is already present before you choose. Guard that thought. Correct it when it falls into fear. Replace it with the chosen wealth impression, and trust that the substance is already receiving the new instruction and beginning to form around it. Money appears through channels shaped by the inner mold. This is the final revelation of how invisible supply becomes visible. The money that arrives in your life does not come from nowhere. It comes through channels, through people, conversations, ideas, opportunities, unexpected doors. But those channels are not random. They are shaped by the inner mold. The dominant thought creates the perceptual field in which certain channels are visible and others are not. It creates the emotional atmosphere in which certain actions are taken and others are avoided. It creates the expectation that makes the mind ready to receive when the channel opens. Every channel through which money has ever flowed into your life was first shaped by the dominant thought that created the conditions for it to be seen, approached, and stepped through. Change the mold, and you change the channels through which supply moves. There is a distinction in Wattles' teaching that few people fully absorb, and the failure to absorb it is the reason so many plans fail despite genuine effort. The distinction is between the command and the plan. The command is the dominant thought made definite. It is the clear, certain, spiritually charged declaration of what form you are impressing upon the formless substance. The plan is the visible method. The plan is the route you currently believe the supply will travel. The command says, "This is the form I impress upon the substance," and Source will move it into visibility through whatever channel is best. The plan says, "This is one visible route I may use to move toward the form I seek." The command comes first. The plan follows. When these two are confused, everything goes wrong. The command is simple. It must be. The more the dominant thought is wrapped in complexity, conditions, and qualifications, the weaker its impression on the substance. A command like, "I receive abundant supply from Source through channels I may not yet see," is far more powerful as a dominant thought than a complicated mental negotiation about which specific path should open and exactly how much money should arrive through each channel by what date. The substance does not require the viewer's approval of its methods. It requires the viewer's clear, dominant impression of the form, the result, the identity of being someone through whom supply flows continuously from an infinite source. The simpler and more definite the command, the clearer the mold pressed into the substance. The command must be repeated, not because the substance forgets, but because the mind forgets. The fearful mind returns to fear. The old thought rises again the moment pressure arrives. Repetition of the command is not spiritual weakness or insecurity. It is the deliberate, faithful practice of maintaining the dominant impression against the constant pull of the visible world's contrary evidence. Each repetition is another pressing of the mold. Each return to the command after the fear thought rises is a deepening of the impression, a strengthening of the chain between invisible substance and visible form. Wattles did not describe a one-time event. He described a sustained orientation, a commanded reality, held with consistent faith through the days and weeks and months required for the substance to take shape through visible channels. The command must be felt. This is what separates a mechanical recitation from a genuine dominant thought. The command that is merely spoken without the corresponding inner feeling is a word without weight. It touches the surface of the substance lightly and leaves no lasting impression. But the command that is returned to with genuine feeling, with the emotional quality of the wealth reality it describes, with the inner sense of already moving in that direction, with the quiet certainty that the source is responding, presses deeply into the formless substance and begins forming a mold that will hold its shape under pressure. Feeling is the carrier wave of thought. Without feeling, the thought is weak. With feeling, it becomes formative. The command must be acted. Action is the earthly embodiment of the dominant thought. When the viewer holds the command and then takes an action that contradicts it, either by speaking lack over their future, making a panicked decision beneath their wealth thought, or refusing the open door because it does not look exactly like the expected delivery, the command is undermined. But when the action rises from the same inner atmosphere as the command, when it is taken with the quiet authority of a person who has already received at the level of thought and is now moving in the certain way, the action carries spiritual force. It closes the circuit between the invisible command and the visible channel. It proves the faith by embodying it in visible movement. A plan built on a poverty thought carries poverty. This must be understood without softening. A business person who makes every practical calculation from a dominant thought of scarcity has poisoned the plan at its source. Every projection is trimmed by the ceiling that the poverty thought has installed. Every offer is priced by the self-worth that the poverty thought has defined. Every decision in the plan is made from the state that the poverty thought has created, a state of contracted perception, low expectation, and fear-driven caution. The plan may be technically sound. It may follow all the visible rules of a practical financial strategy, but it will produce outcomes shaped by the dominant thought from which it was built. And the dominant thought was scarcity. A plan built on a wealth thought carries increase. The same business decisions, the same financial planning, the same practical steps when made from a dominant thought of supply, receiving, and trust in source carry a completely different quality. The vision in the plan is honest and uncontracted. The offer is priced from genuine value. The expectation built into every projection reflects a mind that genuinely believes the supply is real and that the channels will open. And that expectation creates the inner atmosphere from which actions will be taken in the certain way, with the kind of authority and openness that makes the actions genuinely effective in the world. The plan serves the command. The command must be established first. The command must be simple, repeated, felt, and acted. This is the full teaching on the command versus the plan in 4 words. Simple because complexity contracts the mold. Repeated because dominance is built by return. Felt because feeling carries the impression into the depth of the substance. Acted because faith without embodiment remains suspended between the invisible and the visible and cannot complete the chain. The person who holds these 4 qualities in their dominant thought is not dreaming. They are practicing the law with precision. They are impressing the formless substance with a definite command that the substance is bound by its own responsive nature to receive and begin forming into visible supply. The plan changes, the command does not. This is the practical freedom that the distinction between command and plan creates. The viewer who understands this can hold the dominant wealth thought steady, even when a specific visible route fails. The plan was one method. When that method closes, another opens. The command was not that the money would come through that specific channel. The command was that money comes, that supply is real, that source moves through whatever channel it chooses. The failure of the plan does not shake the command. And because the command is unshaken, the dominant thought remains intact. The substance continues receiving the clear impression, and a new channel begins forming in the perceptual field of the prepared and expectant mind. Return to the command when the plan collapses. This is the practical application of the entire teaching on the invisible mechanism. When the visible route fails, when the client cancels, when the deal falls through, when the income stream dries, the mind will want to fall back into the returning fear thought. That is the moment. That is the test of whether the command or the fear thought is genuinely dominant. The viewer who returns to the wealth command in that moment is not in denial. They are practicing the law. They are refusing to let the closed plan become the mold for the next season. They are insisting that the source is not limited to the plan that just failed, and that a new channel is already forming in the invisible, in response to the dominant impression they are choosing to hold in this very moment of pressure. If this teaching is awakening something genuine in you, if the principle that your dominant thought is pressing itself upon the formless substance from which your supply must come, is landing as more than an idea, as a law you recognize and want to understand more fully, then this channel was built for exactly that recognition. The Master's legacy exists to preserve and interpret the teachings of the old authorities on wealth, thought, faith, and invisible supply. Wallace Wattles, James Allen, Florence Scovel Shinn, and others who understood the laws governing the movement from invisible substance to visible form. Every teaching on this channel is designed to go deeper than the surface and give you the ancient spiritual law behind the visible financial experience you are trying to change. Subscribe to the Master's Legacy now so that the next teaching reaches you. These are not casual videos about positive thinking. They are careful, deep, sustained interpretations of the laws that govern how thought becomes form and how invisible supply becomes visible money through the channels a prepared mind can perceive. If you are serious about understanding these laws and applying them with the precision Wattles described, then subscribe and let this channel be the ongoing voice that guides you through the complete teaching of the Masters. The mind demands visible proof before choosing a dominant thought. This is its most persistent and most limiting habit. It says, show me the account balance first and I will think wealth. Show me the client first and I will feel receiving. Show me the open door first and I will act in confidence. Show me the evidence before I invest my dominant thought in the wealth impression. And in this demand for prior proof, the mind disqualifies itself from receiving the very evidence it is waiting for, because the evidence forms through channels shaped by the dominant thought, which the mind refuses to hold until the evidence is already present. This is the circle that keeps the fearful mind exactly where it is. The law says precisely the opposite. Think from wealth, and you become progressively able to perceive and act through the proof as it forms. The dominant thought creates the expectation. The expectation opens the perceptual field. The perceptual field begins to notice channels that were invisible before. The channels invite action. The action produces visible form, and the visible form that begins to appear is then recognized by the mind as the proof it was waiting for. But that proof could not have appeared had the mind not first chosen the dominant thought without the proof. The sequence begins in the invisible. It begins with the chosen thought. The proof comes after. The mind cannot calculate the how because the how does not exist yet at the moment of choice. The how is the specific visible route through which the substance will move the supply into the viewer's life. And that route forms in response to the dominant thought, through the perceptual shifts and channel openings that the dominant thought creates. It cannot be pre-calculated because it is not pre-existing. It is forming continuously in response to the inner mold. To demand that the how be visible before the dominant thought is chosen is to demand that the effect appear before the cause. It is to insist that the form exist before the mold is pressed. The law cannot operate in that direction. The cause must always precede the effect. What the mind calls practical thinking, the habit of waiting for visible proof before committing to the dominant thought, is actually a form of surrender to the visible world as the final authority. It places the visible effect above the invisible cause, and in doing so, it makes it impossible for the invisible cause to function. The viewer who waits for certainty before thinking from wealth will wait indefinitely, because the certainty they are waiting for can only be produced by the dominant thought they are refusing to hold. This is not a small error. It is a foundational one. It inverts the law and then wonders why the law is not working. Wattles was asking for something radical, to think from the wealth before the wealth is visible, because that is the only sequence in which the law operates. Choose the dominant thought before the evidence arrives. This is the demand of the law, and it is also its gift. Because once the viewer genuinely accepts that the invisible chain begins with chosen thought, they are no longer dependent on the visible world to give them permission to think well about their financial life. The account balance does not determine the dominant thought. The circumstances do not determine the inner mold. The closed channel does not decide the next impression on the substance. The viewer decides. The viewer chooses. The viewer returns to the wealth thought even when nothing visible supports it, because they understand that the support is invisible and already in motion, forming through channels that the dominant thought is opening even now. Act as though the supply is real before it is visible. This is the final application of the teaching that the mind cannot calculate the how. The action taken from the dominant wealth thought, before visible proof confirms it, is the action that embodies the command in the visible world. It is the action that closes the circuit between the invisible impression and the visible channel. It is the faithful step that Wattles described in the certain way, and it is what separates the viewer who holds the law intellectually from the viewer who is actually living it. The how will not be revealed in advance. It will be revealed through the consistent dominant thought, the faithful expectation, and the ready action of a mind that has chosen to treat the invisible cause as more real than the visible effect. Imagine a foundry where liquid metal is being prepared. The metal itself has no inherent shape. It is formless, responsive, and entirely ready to take the shape of whatever mold it is poured into. The mold determines everything. A mold shaped like poverty produces poverty. A mold shaped like abundance produces abundance. The metal does not argue with the mold. It does not evaluate the mold and decide whether it deserves the shape being pressed into it. It simply responds. It flows into the space the mold defines. It sets according to the dimensions the mold has established, and when it is removed from the mold, it holds exactly the form the mold impressed upon it. The formless substance that Wattles described is the metal. It is present, alive, responsive, and entirely ready to take the shape of the dominant impression placed upon it by a mind in faith. It does not evaluate your worth. It does not measure your past. It does not compare your circumstances to your neighbors. It responds to the dominant thought. It flows into the mold the dominant thought has defined. It sets according to the shape the most consistent and emotionally felt impression has established. And when supply begins to appear in the visible world, it appears in the shape of the dominant thought that preceded it, for better or worse through whatever channel was available. The dominant thought is the mold. This is the central image to hold as you receive this teaching, not the spoken affirmation alone, not the occasional inspired moment. The dominant thought, the one that occupies the most hours and the deepest feeling, the one that rises automatically under pressure, the one that is already present before you choose it. That thought is the mold being continuously pressed into the formless substance, and the substance, faithful and responsive, is continuously taking its shape. This is why the mold must be deliberately chosen and consistently maintained, because the substance does not wait for ideal conditions to begin forming. It forms continuously from whatever mold is currently dominant. A broken mold creates broken form. When the dominant thought is fragmented, contradictory, and constantly shifting between wealth and fear, the mold is broken. There are cracks in it. The liquid substance flows partially into the shape of wealth and partially into the gaps of fear. The visible form that results is incomplete, unstable, and inconsistent. The viewer experiences brief periods of improvement followed by collapse. They receive and then lose. They advance and then retreat. The pattern is not evidence that the law is failing. It is evidence that the mold has cracks. The substance is faithfully taking the shape available to it, and the shape available is a fractured one. The repair begins at the level of the dominant thought. A clear mold creates clear form. When the dominant thought is held with consistency, returned to with faithfulness, and maintained with grateful certainty, even when the visible world presents contrary evidence, the mold becomes clear. The cracks are sealed by repetition, the shape becomes precise, and the substance flows into that precise shape with increasing ease because the mold is no longer offering it contradictory instructions. A clear dominant wealth thought is a clear mold, and a clear mold produces clear form. The supply that comes through it is not accidental or partial. It is the visible expression of the precise impression that has been pressed into the substance by the patient, faithful dominant thought. Fear molds lack. This is a direct consequence of the principle, not a moral judgment. When fear is the dominant thought, the mold being pressed into the substance is a mold of lack. The substance takes that shape faithfully. The channels through which supply would flow are shaped by an expectation of loss and scarcity. The perception notices evidence of limitation. The action taken from fear carries fear's signature. The visible result confirms the original fear thought, and the fear thought, now validated by visible evidence, deepens its dominance. This is the cycle. It is not a punishment. It is the law operating exactly as described. The mold is lack. The form is lack. The only exit from the cycle is to change the mold. Certainty molds increase. With the same faithfulness, when the dominant thought is one of wealth, supply, receiving, and trust in source, the mold pressed into the substance is shaped by increase. The substance flows into that shape. The channels form in alignment with it. The expectation opens the perceptual field to those channels. The action taken from certainty carries certainty's quality. And the visible results begin to confirm the dominant thought of increase, deepening its dominance and strengthening the mold for the next cycle of formation. This is the upward movement that Wattles described as the certain way, not a lucky accident, not a special grace given to the few. The law operating faithfully through a clear and dominant mold of wealth. Gratitude stabilizes the mold. When the viewer brings genuine gratitude to the dominant thought, they are doing more than performing a spiritual courtesy. They are stabilizing the emotional foundation of the mold. Gratitude holds the mind in an orientation toward what is present and real, rather than what is absent and feared. It prevents the mold from being destabilized by passing pressure. It keeps the clear shape intact through the fluctuations of visible circumstances. The person who practices genuine gratitude while holding the dominant wealth thought is someone whose mold does not crack under ordinary financial stress. They have added a stabilizing quality to the impression that keeps the substance forming around a consistent, clear, and faithful shape. Action pours energy into it. Imagine the foundry worker who, after the mold is prepared and the metal is ready, actually pours the metal. Action is the pour. Without the mold, the pour produces nothing shaped. Without the pour, the mold remains empty. Both are required. The dominant thought prepares the mold. The faithful action aligned with that thought is the movement that fills it. When the viewer acts in the certain way, taking the step that is visible from the standpoint of the dominant wealth thought, they are pouring the substance into the clear mold and allowing it to set. They are completing the chain from invisible to visible. They are honoring the mold with the substance of real-world movement. Money forms through the shape repeatedly impressed. There is a temporal dimension to this teaching that must not be overlooked. The substance does not always produce the visible form instantly. The mold must be pressed consistently enough and deeply enough for the form to take shape through the channels of visible reality. This takes time. Not infinite time, but faithful time. The viewer who presses the mold today fears tomorrow, presses again on Wednesday, and despairs by Thursday is not giving the substance a consistent impression to work with. The viewer who presses the mold daily, who returns to the dominant wealth thought every time fear rises, who stabilizes it with gratitude and embodies it with action, is pressing an ever-deepening impression that the substance is receiving continuously and forming around with increasing precision. The money that eventually appears through visible channels is the exact fulfillment of the shape that has been pressed into the substance through the faithful, consistent, dominant thought. Interference is what happens when the mold is given contradictory instructions. It is not a mysterious spiritual punishment. It is the predictable result of pressing two opposing shapes into the substance at the same time and expecting a clear form to emerge. The first form of interference is affirming wealth but expecting loss. The viewer says, "I receive abundant supply," and then spends the rest of the day mentally preparing for the money not to come. The affirmation impresses one shape. The expectation of loss impresses the opposite. The substance receives both and produces a contradictory form: partial supply, incomplete channels, opportunities that arrive and then dissolve before they are fully realized. The second form of interference is visualizing increase but speaking lack. The inner image of wealth is moving toward form. The dominant thought is beginning to stabilize the mold, and then the viewer opens their mouth and speaks the fear thought into the room. They describe the difficulty of their situation with emotional conviction. They tell the story of financial struggle to anyone who will listen. They rehearse the lack narrative with the same feeling and repetition that Wattles described as the mechanism of dominant thought formation. Every spoken word of lack is also a thought, and when spoken words carry emotional weight, they press the fear mold into the substance with significant force. The visualization builds. The spoken word tears down. The mold cracks. The third form of interference is wanting money but despising it. This contradiction runs deeper than most viewers recognize. They desire financial increase and simultaneously carry a deep unconscious hostility toward wealth, toward wealthy people, or toward the idea of having more than others. This hostility creates a repelling energy in the dominant thought, a mold that simultaneously reaches toward and pushes away. The substance cannot form clearly around a contradictory instruction of this kind. The supply that begins to form is disrupted by the inner verdict against the very thing being requested. The viewer wonders why money seems to approach and then turn away. The mold has an exit built into it. The fourth form of interference is asking for abundance but feeling guilty. When the viewer carries guilt about receiving, about having more than others, about asking the universe for significant supply while so many are struggling, the guilt presses its own shape into the substance alongside the abundance request. The dominant thought becomes a request wrapped in unworthiness. The form that results is limited by the guilt that partially contradicts the receiving signal. Wattles taught that the person who advances into more of life does not take from others. They increase the general wealth by demonstrating the law and circulating value through their increased action and gratitude. Understanding this removes the guilt and clears the mold. The fifth form of interference is saying, "I receive," but refusing help when it arrives. This is perhaps the most practically visible form of interference. The viewer has been affirming receiving, and then, when supply arrives through an unexpected channel, through a person offering assistance, through a collaboration, through a gift, through a form that does not match the expected delivery, the old dominant thought rises and refuses it. The help feels like charity. The collaboration feels like dependence. The unexpected form of supply triggers the poverty identity that says I should be able to manage alone. And the received supply is declined or deflected. The mold said, receive. The action said, refuse. The interference was total. The sixth form of interference is claiming trust but panicking daily. Trust as a stated position is not the same as trust as the dominant thought. The viewer can say, I trust source, while spending 23 hours of the day in a state of anxious calculation about visible channels. The anxiety is a thought. The panic is a thought. Both are pressing their shape into the substance alongside the stated trust. The dominant thought is the panic, not the trust, because the panic occupies more hours and more emotional intensity. The interference is the gap between the verbal claim of trust and the actual dominant thought of fear. Closing that gap is the whole work. And it is not closed by saying trust more loudly. It is closed by genuinely returning to the wealth thought more often. The seventh form of interference is changing the desire constantly. Wattles emphasized the importance of holding the dominant thought steady and definite. When the viewer shifts their dominant wealth thought from week to week, changing the form they are requesting from the substance in response to every visible fluctuation, they prevent the mold from ever fully setting. A different shape is pressed each week. A different impression reaches the substance each month, and the substance, responsive and faithful, begins forming around each new instruction before the previous one has had time to manifest. The result is a life of perpetual movement towards supply that never quite arrives in visible form, because the mold is never held long enough for the substance to complete its response. The eighth form of interference is letting the old returning thought reclaim its position under pressure. This is the most common and the most damaging interference because it happens at the moment of greatest consequence. When the pressure rises, when the bill arrives, when the channel closes, when the circumstance delivers bad news, the old fear thought rises with immediate authority. It has years of repetition behind it. It has the full weight of the visible world confirming it. And in that moment of pressure, the viewer who has been building the new dominant wealth thought must choose, instantly and firmly, to return to the wealth thought rather than surrendering dominance back to the fear. The interference occurs the moment the surrender happens. The mold cracks, the form that was nearly finished dissolves, and the substance returns to the familiar shape of lack. This is why the correction practice matters so much, and why it must be applied most fiercely in the hardest moments. There is a freedom available on the other side of this teaching that most viewers have not yet fully tasted. It is the freedom that comes from understanding that you do not need to control every channel. You do not need to track every visible movement of potential supply. You do not need to monitor every fluctuation in the visible world with anxious intensity. Because the work is not in managing the channels, the work is in guarding the mold. And guarding the mold is an inner discipline, not an outer surveillance. When the dominant thought is clear and stable, the channels form and move without requiring the viewer's constant management. The substance is responsive. The law is faithful. The mold shapes the form. The viewer's part is to maintain the dominant impression with consistency and let the invisible mechanism do what it does. You do not need to control every channel. You must guard the mold. Read that distinction slowly and let it settle. Every channel you cannot control, and there are many. Every person who is a potential source of supply, every opportunity that has not yet arrived, every invisible path the substance might use to move toward you, none of these are in your direct command. But the mold is in your command. The dominant thought is yours to choose. The returning thought is yours to correct. The inner image of wealth is yours to hold and return to. The atmospheric quality of expectation is yours to cultivate. Guard those. Guard the mold with vigilance and faithfulness, and you can release the desperate surveillance of every visible channel with genuine peace. The form follows the dominant impression. This is the freedom statement. The visible form that will appear in your financial life does not require your constant anxious management to arrive. It follows the dominant impression with the faithfulness of a law, not the unpredictability of luck. When the dominant thought is clear and stable, the form is coming. The channels are forming, the supply is moving through the invisible architecture of the substance toward the mold you have pressed. Your worry about when and how it will arrive does not accelerate it. It often interferes with it, as described in the previous teaching on interference. The form follows the impression. Guard the impression and release the tracking. Protect the thought that is forming your future. This is the practical summary of the freedom teaching. The single most important financial work you can do in any given day is not monitoring your bank balance. It is not analyzing every possible visible channel for signs of movement. It is protecting the dominant thought that is forming the mold from which your next financial season must emerge. Every time the fear thought rises and you return to the wealth thought, you are performing the essential work. Every time the panic thought reaches for dominance and you press the certainty thought down into the deepest place of your inner life, you are guarding the mold. This is the work Wattles described, and it is the work that releases the viewer from the exhausting, anxious surveillance of every visible sign. There is peace in this teaching, not a peace that denies the visible world, but a peace that understands the visible world's proper place in the sequence of creation. Visible things are late stage. They are the end of a process that began in the invisible, in the dominant thought pressing its shape into the formless substance. When the viewer grasps this fully, they stop being held hostage by every fluctuation of visible circumstance. They see a drop in income not as the final word on their financial life, but as a late-stage form that is already being corrected at the invisible level by the dominant wealth thought they are holding. They see a closed channel not as evidence that supply is finished, but as the redirection of the substance through a different and perhaps better shaped opening. This is genuine spiritual freedom, not denial. The wealth thought is forming right now. This is the declaration the viewer must hold as they release the anxious tracking of visible signs. Even in this moment, even before any visible evidence confirms it, the dominant thought being pressed with consistency and faith is making its impression upon the formless substance. The law is not suspended while evidence is absent. The law operates continuously in response to the dominant impression continuously given. Every faithful return to the wealth thought, every correction of the fear thought, every stabilizing moment of genuine gratitude is pressing the mold more deeply and clearly into the substance that is already, even now, beginning to move through channels toward the form of supply the viewer has been commanding. The freedom is in trusting this. The work is in guarding the thought that makes it true. The freedom of not tracking the package is simply the freedom of trusting the law. Once you genuinely accept that the formless substance responds to the dominant impression with the faithfulness of a natural law, you no longer need to watch every visible development with the anxiety of someone who does not trust the delivery. The order has been placed. The command has been pressed into the substance. The impression has been given. The law is operating. The substance is responding. The channels are forming. Your part is to maintain the dominant thought, correct the interference when it rises, act through the open doors as they appear, and receive the supply with the quiet authority of someone who knew it was coming. The package is on the way. Guard the mold. Release the tracking. Trust the law. Before anything else can change in your financial life at the level of formative thought, you must answer one honest question with precision. What thought do you want forming your financial life? Not what thought are you currently running. Not what thought feels most familiar or most defensible, given your visible circumstances. What thought do you choose? Because the law of dominant thought gives you the authority to choose it. And everything that follows in the practical protocol depends on having answered this question clearly, honestly, and with the kind of definiteness that Wattles identified as essential for the substance to receive a clear impression. Here is an exercise that will serve you with genuine precision if you complete it honestly. Finish this sentence with the specific thought you choose as the dominant formation of your financial life. My dominant wealth thought is this: I am supplied by Source. Money takes form through the channels that Source opens for me. I do not depend on a single visible channel. I do not calculate how the supply will arrive. I hold the dominant thought of supply with certainty, return to it under pressure, and act through the open door with the confidence of a person who understands that the invisible law is already responding. Write that. Read it. Return to it. Press it into your dominant thought. with enough repetition and feeling that it begins to replace the fear thought as the automatic response to financial pressure. What thought do you want forming your financial life? This is not a question about what you would like the visible world to produce. It is a question about the inner mold. The thought that forms the life is not the thought you wish you had. It is the thought you actually hold with the most hours and the most feeling. So this question is both a statement of intention and a diagnostic. What thought do you want, and what thought do you actually have when the pressure arrives? The gap between those two answers is the precise work to be done. Identifying the gap is the first practical step in the protocol, because you cannot replace a thought you have not honestly named. What identity belongs to the wealth thought you are choosing? Identity is the deepest level of dominant thought. When the dominant thought becomes an identity, it ceases to require constant conscious maintenance and begins operating automatically from the deepest level of the self. The identity of the person who is supplied by Source is not merely someone who thinks positively about money. It is someone who genuinely knows they belong to the economy of invisible supply, that the formless substance is responsive to them, that the channels of their provision are not limited to the visible arrangements they can currently see, and that the law operating beneath their circumstances is faithful and precise. Build toward that identity, define it clearly, know what it feels like to inhabit it. It becomes the deepest mold of all. What speech supports the dominant wealth thought? The words you speak aloud are also thoughts. They are thoughts given external form, and the thoughts you speak repeatedly, the way you describe your financial situation to others, the statements you make about what is possible for you, the story you tell about your money, your worth, your capacity to receive, all of these are pressing the mold into the substance with the weight of spoken intention. The speech that supports the dominant wealth thought is speech that reflects the inner command, that speaks from the wealth identity rather than rehearsing the poverty narrative. This does not require pretending visible difficulties do not exist. It requires refusing to let the description of difficulty become the dominant spoken signal you are sending to the substance. What action proves the dominant wealth thought? Action is the earthly embodiment of the thought, and the actions that prove the wealth thought are not dramatic demonstrations of financial confidence. They are the small, consistent, daily choices that align with the identity of a person who receives from Source through open channels. They are the decision to make the offer, the choice to hold the price, the willingness to be visible in one's work and value, the readiness to receive help without deflecting it, the practice of circulating what is available rather than hoarding from fear. Each of these actions is a proof of the dominant thought. Each one presses the mold more firmly into the substance by demonstrating, in the visible world, that the invisible command has been genuinely received and accepted. What fear contradicts the dominant wealth thought? This question is not an invitation to dwell in fear. It is a precise diagnostic tool. The fear thought that most directly contradicts the chosen wealth thought is the one most likely to crack the mold under pressure. Name it. Look at it clearly. Understand the exact form of the interference it creates. The person who chooses a dominant thought of receiving but carries a deep fear of unworthiness knows that the fear of unworthiness is the specific crack in their mold. The person who chooses a dominant thought of source-supplied abundance but carries a fear that all channels will eventually close knows that this specific fear is what will rise most powerfully when a visible channel closes. Naming the fear gives you the precise target for the correction practice. The wealth thought must be defined before it can be defended. If the viewer has not clearly articulated the specific dominant thought they are choosing, they cannot defend it when pressure rises. The fear thought will rise with authority, and the viewer will not have a precise alternative to return to. It will feel like the fear is the truth because nothing has been built to replace it. But when the wealth thought is clearly defined, specifically stated, emotionally felt, and deliberately repeated in advance of pressure, it becomes the familiar place to return to when the pressure arrives. It has been rehearsed enough that the return is possible even in difficult moments. Define it now. Make it specific. Make it yours. Make it the thought you know you are choosing as the formation of your financial future. The what comes before the how. This is the principle beneath the entire protocol. The how is the visible method, the channel, the strategy, the plan. The what is the dominant thought, the command, the identity, the mold. Wattles was clear that you begin with the what. You define the form you are impressing upon the substance. You hold that form as the dominant thought with clarity, faith, and gratitude. And then you act through the nearest open door, trusting that the how will reveal itself through the channels. The substance opens in response to the dominant impression. Start with the what. Define it clearly. Return to it daily. Let it be the first thought in the morning and the last thought before sleep, and watch what begins forming in the invisible architecture of your financial life. The dominant wealth thought, once defined, becomes a practice rather than a performance. The viewer who defines their wealth thought with honesty and specificity is not creating a mask to wear over the fear. They are creating a genuine orientation to return to. It will feel unfamiliar at first. It will feel like a stretch. The mind will call it denial. The visible circumstances will challenge it daily. But with each faithful return to the chosen thought, each correction of the fear thought back to the wealth thought, each stabilizing moment of gratitude and each action taken from its direction, the thought becomes more natural. The orientation deepens, the dominance shifts, and the substance receives an ever clearer, ever more consistent impression of the form through which your supply must come. Releasing the how is not passivity. This must be stated clearly, so there is no confusion. Releasing the how does not mean doing nothing while waiting for money to appear from the sky. It means releasing the specific visible root as the object of your dominant thought, so that your dominant thought can remain on the command, the what, the form, the wealth identity, rather than being consumed by anxious calculation about a single method of delivery. The person who holds the dominant thought of supply, while simultaneously demanding that it come only through one specific channel, has not fully released the how. They have placed a condition on the law, and the law does not respond to conditions placed on its method of operation. Here is the practice. First, identify the fear thought. Do this specifically, not generally, not just, I am afraid about money. What is the exact thought you return to when money is uncertain? What are the specific words the fear thought uses? What is the precise shape of the poverty mold? Write it down. See it clearly. Naming the fear thought removes some of its automatic power. It can no longer operate as the invisible dominant force when you have brought it into the light of conscious examination. The fear thought loses a portion of its dominance the moment you can observe it clearly enough to say, that is what I have been pressing into the substance, and I am choosing to press a different shape now. Then write the wealth thought. Write it as a specific positive present tense statement of the financial identity and reality you are choosing as the dominant impression, not a wish or a request directed at the universe. A declaration of the form being commanded and the identity of the person making the command. Something like this. I am a person through whom source-opened channels bring supply. I hold the wealth thought under pressure. I release the method and trust the source. I act through the nearest open door with the certainty of a person who knows the invisible law is operating on their behalf. Write it in the way that resonates most truthfully for you. But write it. Make it real on the page before you make it real as the dominant thought. Repeat the wealth thought during pressure. This is the critical application point of the release practice. The pressure moment is the exact moment when the fear thought has the most momentum, and the wealth thought has the least support from visible circumstances. That is the moment the practice must be applied, not in the easy morning when everything is calm and the affirmation feels natural. In the Tuesday afternoon when the account is low and the client has not responded and the visible world is telling the old story loudly. In that moment, the viewer must return to the wealth thought, not with loud force, with the quiet firmness of someone who knows the law. Return, press the mold, hold the impression. Let the substance receive the command even while the visible world is presenting its most convincing argument for fear. Stop feeding the fear thought with speech. Once the wealth thought is defined and the fear thought is named, the most immediately effective action the viewer can take is to stop giving the fear thought the additional fuel of spoken repetition. Every time the fear thought is spoken aloud in the form of "money never stays with me," or "I am always behind," or "this is never going to change," it is being given additional energy and emotional confirmation. The spoken word deepens the dominant impression. Stopping the spoken fear thought does not cure the inner fear immediately, but it removes a significant source of reinforcement from the fear mold and reduces the contradictory interference the spoken word was adding to the substance's impression. Speak the wealth thought instead. Speak it quietly, speak it firmly. Let the spoken word embody the dominant thought rather than betray it. Act from the chosen thought before the evidence changes. This is the most challenging instruction in the release practice, and also the most essential. The viewer is being asked to take action that aligns with the wealth thought before the visible world has confirmed the wealth thought's validity. To make the offer before the full pipeline is visible. To hold the price before the client has agreed. To invest in the preparation before the supply has materialized. To move through the open door before the destination is guaranteed. This is action in the certain way. It is the faithful embodiment of the dominant thought in the visible world, performed with the quiet authority of someone who understands that the visible proof follows the invisible cause, and that waiting for the proof before acting from the wealth thought is simply waiting for the effect to produce the cause, which the law does not allow. The how is not the promise. The route through which supply arrives is not the supply itself. The channel is not the source. The plan is not the command. These distinctions, held consistently in the dominant thought, release the grip of the how and allow the viewer to hold the wealth thought clearly without being continuously disrupted by the fluctuating fortunes of a single visible method. When the route closes, the source is not closed. When the plan fails, the command is not cancelled. When the expected channel dries, the formless substance is not diminished. The how changes constantly. The what remains. The dominant wealth thought remains. The impression remains. And the substance in its faithfulness finds a different channel through which to move the form that has been pressed into it. Releasing the how is an act of spiritual maturity, not spiritual naivety. It is not saying, "I will not act." It is saying, "I will act through every open door, but I will not worship any single door as the only possible source of supply." It is saying, "I will plan wisely, but I will not carry the plan as though it were the command." It is saying, "I trust the source to find the route, while I hold the dominant thought steady and walk through every opening with readiness." This is the balance Wattles described, and the balance this channel has preserved throughout its teachings. Trust the source. Release the route. Guard the mold. Walk through the open door. Let the supply form through whatever channel the invisible law chooses. One more dimension of releasing the how is releasing the timeline. The calculating mind wants not only to control the channel, but to control the schedule. It wants the supply to arrive by a specific visible deadline because the pressure of visible circumstance is creating urgency. But urgency from fear is not the same as inspired, timely action from faith. The urgency from fear contracts the perceptual field and makes the viewer less able to notice the channels the substance is already opening. Releasing the timeline does not mean becoming indifferent to practical financial responsibility. It means refusing to let the deadline become the dominant thought, because a dominant thought of "the supply must come by this date or all is lost" is a mold shaped by scarcity and panic, not by wealth and trust. Hold the command. Take the action. Release the schedule to source. The person who has genuinely released the how is recognizable not by what they say, but by how they respond to unexpected channels. When supply appears through a route they did not predict, they receive it with readiness rather than suspicion. When help arrives in an unfamiliar form, they accept it as evidence of the invisible law rather than deflecting it, because it does not match the expected delivery. When a door opens in a direction they had not considered, they step through it with the faith of someone who knows that the how is not their department, that their department is the dominant thought, the wealth mold, the faithful expectation, and the willing action through whatever opening the source has chosen. That is the freedom of releasing the how, and it is available to every person who is willing to guard the mold and trust the law. When the dominant thought is held with genuine consistency and the interference is actively reduced through faithful practice, something begins to happen in the viewer's visible experience that can only be described accurately as surprise, not the manufactured surprise of forced positivity or wishful thinking. The genuine surprise of channels appearing that the calculating mind did not predict and could not have arranged. A new income source appears from a direction the viewer had not considered. A person reaches out with an opportunity that seems improbably well-timed. A small idea that had been sitting quietly in the background suddenly gains momentum and begins opening doors. These are not miracles in the supernatural sense. They are the natural result of the dominant thought opening the perceptual field and the formless substance moving through channels that the cleared mold has made accessible. A new channel appears, not through the viewer's frantic searching and forcing, but through the perceptual opening that the consistent dominant thought has created. The mind that expects supply, that holds the dominant wealth thought with genuine faith, develops a sensitivity to opportunity that the fear-dominated mind simply cannot access. It notices what was invisible before. It recognizes the channel where the fearful mind saw only an unrelated encounter. The surprise is real, but it is not random. It is the result of the dominant thought shaping the perceptual field to be open to what source is already moving toward the viewer from directions the calculating mind could not have scheduled. A price increase becomes possible. This is a specific and practical form of the surprise. The viewer who has been holding the dominant wealth thought and acting from it gradually stops pricing from fear. They begin to feel with genuine certainty that their value is real and that the supply that comes through their work can be larger than they previously allowed. They test the higher price, and they discover that the resistance they anticipated was largely a projection of the poverty thought rather than a reality of the market. The market responds to the dominant thought from which the offer is made. The confidence of a person who genuinely believes in their value creates a different response than the apology of a person offering from a fear of not being accepted. A better decision is made. When the dominant thought is wealth rather than fear, the decision-making faculty of the mind improves, not because the viewer becomes intellectually superior, but because the perceptual field through which information is gathered and evaluated is no longer contracted by fear. Decisions made from the dominant wealth thought are broader, more creative, more genuinely open to unexpected solutions than decisions made from the contracted perception of a fear-dominated mind. The person expects the right answer to appear, and because they expect it, they remain open long enough for it to arrive. The surprise is in the quality and the timing. The decision comes more clearly than expected. The solution appears before the deadline closes. An opportunity becomes visible that had always been present. This is perhaps the most humbling form of surprise. The viewer realizes that the channel they are now stepping through was not new. It was present in the same environment they had been moving through for months or years. But the dominant fear thought had made it invisible. The poverty mold had shaped a perceptual field that simply did not register the opportunity as relevant, possible, or meant for them. The shift in the dominant thought does not create new opportunities from nothing. It creates a mind that can see what was always there and receive what was always available. The supply was moving toward the viewer already. The dominant thought was the gate through which they could or could not perceive it. A delayed answer arrives. Wattles taught that the substance moves toward form through channels that may not be instantaneous. Sometimes what appears to be a delayed answer is simply the time required for the substance to form through the channels available, especially when those channels require the participation of other people, organizations, or circumstances that are themselves subject to visible timing. The viewer whose dominant thought is patience and trust, who holds the wealth command without anxiety about the schedule, creates the emotional conditions for receiving the delayed answer when it arrives without having abandoned the wealth thought in the interim. The surprise is in the arrival of something that seemed to have stopped moving, but it never stopped. The mold was being pressed the entire time. The substance was forming. The channel was preparing. And then one day the form arrived. The freedom to expect surprise without needing to predict its form is one of the most expansive spiritual experiences available to the person practicing this law. It is the experience of genuinely trusting that Source sees more channels than the mind can calculate, that the formless substance has more creative flexibility than the planning faculty of the human mind, and that the dominant wealth thought, held faithfully and acted through consistently, will result in supply arriving through forms the viewer could not have scripted. This is not wishful thinking. It is the correct and precisely informed expectation of a person who understands the invisible mechanism and trusts the law enough to let it operate at its full creative capacity. The expect surprise orientation also creates a particular quality of daily life that fear cannot produce. It is the quality of alert receptivity. The mind that expects surprise through unknown channels does not spend its days in anxious surveillance of the visible. It moves through the day with a quiet attentiveness, a readiness to notice and receive what source is already preparing through channels that have not yet become visible. This attentiveness is itself an expression of the dominant wealth thought. It is the lived experience of trusting that the mold is holding, the substance is forming, and the surprise is forming in the invisible right now, preparing to arrive in the visible at the moment the channel is fully prepared to deliver it. The dominant thought must take its form in the visible world through action. This is a principle Wattles stated clearly, and it is essential to the integrity of this entire teaching. The mold pressed into the substance, the clear dominant thought held with faith and gratitude and felt certainty, requires the embodiment of action to complete the chain from invisible to visible. The action must be aligned with the thought. And the specific instruction Wattles gave about the action was this: walk through the nearest open door. Not the ideal door you are waiting for, not the door that matches every expectation of how the supply should arrive. The nearest door that is genuinely open. Step through it with the full authority of the dominant thought that has been pressing the mold. If the thought is wealth, stop acting worthless. The viewer who claims a dominant thought of wealth and then continues to behave in all visible ways as though they are without worth or value is not embodying the command. They are contradicting it. Every action taken beneath the value the wealth thought assigns is a crack in the mold. It sends the substance a contradictory signal. The command says wealth, but the action says worthlessness. The substance receives both, and the form that begins to set reflects the actual dominant signal carried by the sum of all impressions, not only the stated thought but the behavior that either confirms or denies it. If the thought is receiving, stop refusing. The viewer who wants supply and simultaneously deflects every form of help, collaboration, generosity, or unexpected provision is blocking the very channel through which the commanded form might be trying to arrive. Receiving is not merely an inner orientation, it is also a visible behavior. It is the willingness to say yes to the open door, even when the door looks different from expectations. The person who holds the dominant thought of receiving, and then in the next moment refuses the offered assistance because of pride or discomfort with dependence, has refused the delivery. The mold commands receiving. The action must confirm it. If the thought is source, stop panic speech. The viewer who holds a dominant thought of trust in source and then speaks their financial fear aloud with full emotional conviction every time pressure rises is not walking through the nearest open door. They are locking themselves in the fear room. Panic speech is the action that contradicts the dominant wealth thought most immediately and most powerfully. If the source is trusted, the speech must reflect that trust, not with false declarations that deny visible reality, but with a measured, grounded refusal to allow the panic thought to become the spoken dominant signal. Let the speech embody the command. Let the words carry the quality of the dominant wealth thought, rather than the panic that the visible world is inviting. If the thought is abundance, make the offer. The person who holds the inner command of abundance and then delays, minimizes, or withholds the offer of their work, their service, or their value to the market is leaving the nearest open door unwalked. The offer is the action. It is the visible embodiment of the command. Every time the viewer delays the offer because they are not yet sure enough, not yet confident enough, not yet feeling safe enough to be visible with their work, they are allowing the fear thought to override the dominant wealth command at the most practical level. Make the offer. Make it from the wealth thought. Make it with the quiet authority of a person who has pressed the wealth mold into the substance and is now acting from the identity of someone through whom supply flows. If the thought is confidence, become visible. Visibility is the action that corresponds to a dominant thought of confidence and wealth. The person who wants to receive supply but remains hidden, minimized, and invisible in their field of work is not walking through the nearest open door. They are standing in the doorway and refusing to step through. Becoming visible means showing up in the full presence and quality of the wealth identity. It means allowing others to see what the viewer offers without the apology of the poverty thought attached. It means acting as though the value is real, because the dominant thought has established that it is, and allowing that reality to become visible in the world where the supply channels can find it and move toward it. If the thought is gratitude, circulate value. Gratitude expressed through circulation is one of the most powerful forms of action aligned with the dominant wealth thought. When the viewer circulates value, when they give generously of what they have been given, when they allow what has passed through their hands to move outward into the world as an expression of the abundance they are commanded by, they are pressing the wealth mold into the substance with the weight of genuine action. They are demonstrating, in the most visible possible way, that the dominant thought is not merely held internally, but is being lived externally. And that lived demonstration is the action Wattles described as the completion of the chain, from invisible substance to visible form. If the thought is certainty, keep moving. The instruction to keep moving may be the simplest and most important application of the entire teaching on walking through the nearest door. When the door is open and the dominant thought is certainty, movement is the only action that honors both. Hesitation in front of an open door is the action of a person whose dominant thought is fear, not certainty. The person whose dominant thought is genuinely certainty moves. They make the call, they write the email, they take the meeting, they build the system, they make the preparation. They act as though the supply is coming, and they are getting ready to receive it, because the dominant thought of certainty tells them it is, and the faithful action of keeping moving is the embodiment of that certainty in the visible world, where the substance is already forming the supply they have commanded. The old thought feels safe. This is the core of the false safety trap, and it must be understood before the correction practice can work. The viewer who has carried a dominant thought of lack for years has not been experiencing that thought as suffering alone. They have also been experiencing it as familiarity. The familiar, even when painful, has a quality that the new and better does not yet possess. It is known. It is predictable. It requires no leap of faith because it has already been confirmed by years of visible evidence. And so the poverty thought, even while it causes suffering, also provides a kind of stability. The mind knows exactly what to expect when it holds the poverty thought. The territory is mapped. And in the geography of the dominant thought, mapped territory feels safer than the unmapped space of a new wealth orientation. The wealth thought may feel false at first. This is the second element of the false safety trap, and it is the one that stops the most sincere viewers from completing the shift to a new dominant thought. When the wealth thought is first adopted as the intended dominant impression, it feels unfamiliar. It does not have years of lived experience behind it. It does not carry the weight of confirmed evidence. And so the mind, accustomed to evaluating truth by the standard of familiar experience, calls the wealth thought a lie. It says, "This is not how your life actually works. You are pretending." This is denial. And without understanding the false safety trap, the viewer agrees with this assessment and returns to the poverty thought, because the poverty thought at least feels honest, even if it is only old training repeated until it became indistinguishable from truth. Familiar lack feels honest. New thought feels strange. This is the essential experience the viewer must name and refuse to misinterpret. The strangeness of the new dominant thought is not evidence that it is false. It is evidence that it is new. Strangeness is what newness feels like before it becomes familiar. The poverty thought once felt strange too. Before years of repetition installed it as the automatic dominant thought, there was a time when that particular fear, that particular financial identity, that particular returning thought of lack was not the natural habitat of the mind. It became natural through repetition. The wealth thought will do exactly the same thing through exactly the same mechanism. Repetition will make it familiar. Familiarity will make it feel true. and when it feels true, it will be pressed into the substance with the depth and consistency that produces visible form. The mind calls the new wealth thought denial, and this is the spiritual masquerade that makes the false safety trap so effective. The mind that has trained itself in the poverty thought will often frame the refusal of the new wealth thought as a virtue. It will say, "I am just being realistic. I am not in denial. I see things as they are." And in this framing, the return to the poverty thought appears to be wisdom rather than repetition, honesty rather than training, practicality rather than fear. But Wattles would ask this question: is the thought that money never stays, that I am always behind, that it is too late for me, is that an honest description of eternal reality? Or is it simply the shape of an old mold that has been pressed so many times it has been mistaken for the bedrock? Safety in lack is not truth. It is repetition. Hold this. The poverty thought feels like truth because it has been repeated. The wealth thought feels like presumption because it has not yet been repeated enough to feel familiar. The correction is not to evaluate which thought is truer by the standard of visible evidence, because the visible evidence was produced by the old dominant thought and cannot be used as an objective test of the new one. The correction is to understand the law. Dominance is built by return. Whatever thought the viewer returns to most consistently, with the most genuine feeling and the deepest repetition, will press the most powerful mold into the formless substance. The only question is which thought will be given the dominance of repetition going forward. The viewer must persist until the new thought becomes home. This is the instruction Wattles would give: not persist through clenched teeth willpower alone. Persist through the understanding that the new wealth thought is becoming home through the exact same mechanism through which the poverty thought became home. Faithful repetition over time. Every day the viewer returns to the wealth thought is a day they are building familiarity. Every time they correct the fear thought back to the wealth thought, they are pressing the new impression more firmly and making the return more natural for the next time. The home territory of the dominant thought shifts through consistent habitation. Live in the wealth thought. Return to it when evicted by fear. Keep moving back. And over time, the wealth thought becomes the familiar place, the natural response, the automatic orientation. That is when the dominance has genuinely shifted. Dominance is built by return, not by the single inspired moment of decision, not by the one powerful declaration made in a moment of breakthrough. By return, by the patient, daily pressure-tested practice of choosing the wealth thought again when the fear thought has risen. The viewer who understands this does not despair when the fear thought returns, because they know the fear thought's return does not undo the dominance already built. It is simply an invitation to return to the wealth thought one more time, to press the mold one more time, to add one more layer of consistent impression to the substance that is already forming around the new pattern. Dominance is built by return. Return again. Here is the truth that will be uncomfortable for some viewers. The law of dominant thought has, on multiple occasions in your life, attempted to deliver supply. And the old dominant thought has refused it. Not because you consciously decided to reject wealth, because the old dominant thought, operating automatically and with the authority of long repetition, encountered the approaching supply and said no before the conscious mind was even fully aware of what was being offered. The delivery was attempted. The old mold rejected the shape that was arriving because it did not match the familiar poverty pattern. And the supply moved on to a channel that was ready to receive it. A chance appeared, and the old thought said no. Perhaps it was the opportunity that required visible action before all the certainty was present. The wealth thought would have said, "Move forward, the law is operating, take the step." The old thought said, "Wait, this feels risky, the evidence is not sufficient, pull back." And the chance closed. A compliment appeared, reflecting genuine value and worth. The wealth thought would have received it. The old thought deflected it with, "Oh, it's nothing really, anyone could do this," reducing the value impression on the substance by refusing to receive the confirmation the universe was offering. Money appeared through an unexpected source, and the old thought feared it would be lost before it could be stabilized. The fear of loss is itself a form of the poverty thought applied to arrived supply. The person who receives money but cannot hold it in the dominant thought as real, who immediately begins catastrophizing about when it will disappear, is pressing the loss mold into the substance precisely at the moment when the wealth thought should be most firmly pressed. The money that arrived is visible confirmation of the law operating. But the old thought that fears loss turns that confirmation into a new anxiety, poisoning the receipt with the same fear that created the insufficiency in the first place. Help appeared, and the old thought mistrusted it. The person in the viewer's life who offered assistance, collaboration, or partnership was a channel through which the substance was attempting to move supply toward the wealth thought's command. But the old poverty thought, which has learned to associate dependence with weakness and help with strings attached, mistrusted the channel and refused the supply. The delivery was attempted. The mold said no, and the substance moved the supply through another channel to a different recipient who was ready to receive it. Visibility appeared as an opportunity, a platform, an audience, a moment when the viewer's value could be recognized and rewarded. The old thought hid. It said, "Not yet. I am not ready. What will people think?" The visibility that was being offered as a channel of supply was avoided because the old dominant thought's identity did not include being visible, recognized, and rewarded. The poverty identity prefers smallness because smallness is safe and familiar. Visibility requires inhabiting the wealth identity in front of others, and the old dominant thought refused that expansion. The channel of visible supply that the universe was opening closed again because the step through it was not taken. Increase appeared, and the old thought felt guilty. A raise was possible, a higher price was accessible, an expansion of the viewer's financial life was genuinely available, and the old thought introduced guilt. It said, "Who am I to ask for more? Others are struggling. Having this much feels wrong." And the increase was refused or diminished or immediately spent down to match the familiar poverty level. Because the poverty thought is not only about the absence of supply, it is about the interior ceiling of what is acceptable to receive. And that ceiling is pressed into the substance just as firmly as the fear of loss, telling the invisible law exactly how much form to produce before the mold stops it. The pattern of rejected delivery is one of the most important discoveries a viewer can make about their own financial history. It is not pleasant to examine. It requires a level of honesty that can feel painful. But it is also profoundly liberating, because it reveals that the supply has been attempting to arrive. The law has been operating, the channels have been forming, and the primary obstacle has not been an absent source or an indifferent universe. It has been the old, dominant thought operating automatically at the threshold of every incoming delivery, evaluating each potential form of supply against the poverty mold, and finding reason to refuse what does not fit the familiar shape of lack. Source moves, and the old thought cancels it. This is the final and most comprehensive form of rejected delivery. The invisible law responds to the viewer's dominant thought with faithfulness, forms the supply through channels shaped by the wealth command, moves toward the viewer through paths prepared by the perceptual opening of the wealth orientation, and arrives at the threshold of visible experience ready to deliver. And the old thought, in a moment of automatic response, cancels, refuses, deflects, doubts, rejects. The delivery is returned, the channel closes, and the viewer, not understanding what has happened, concludes that the law does not work, that wealth is not available, that the universe has failed them. The law worked. The delivery was attempted. The old mold refused the form. This is the hidden sabotage. And the correction is the deliberate, consistent daily practice of changing the dominant thought that stands at the threshold of every incoming delivery. There are specific fear thoughts that have been operating in your financial life as invisible saboteurs. They do not announce themselves as sabotage. They announce themselves as honest assessment. They arrive in the language of caution, realism, and practical wisdom. But they are fear thoughts, and they are pressing molds into the formless substance that shape your financial life from the inside with a precision and a consistency you may not have fully recognized until now. The first and most damaging is this: money never stays with me. This thought, held as the dominant financial identity, tells the substance that every arrival of supply must be followed by departure, and the substance faithfully forms around that instruction. The second fear signal is, I always struggle, I have always struggled, Struggle is the territory I was born into, and struggle is the territory I return to. This thought is not merely a description of past experience. It is a dominant thought, pressing the mold of endless striving without a rival into the formless substance. It tells the invisible law that the viewer's financial identity is one in which effort never fully converts to ease, in which something always remains just out of reach, in which provision is perpetually incomplete, and the substance forms around that mold faithfully, producing not maliciously but accurately the shape of the dominant impression. The third fear signal is, "This is not for me." Watching others receive, watching other people move through channels of supply that seem genuinely open and generous, the viewer hears the old thought say, "That is not available to me. That happens for other people." This thought is a specific and powerful form of the poverty identity because it takes the viewer outside the territory of the law entirely. It says, "The law of supply works but not for me." And in saying so, it refuses the viewer's own eligibility for the very provision they desire. The substance receives this thought as an instruction. Do not direct supply through the channels of this person's life because they have excluded themselves from the territory of receiving. The fourth and fifth are closely related. I cannot receive, and I will fail. I cannot receive operates as a closing signal at the threshold of every incoming supply, the automatic rejection mechanism described in the rejected delivery teaching. I will fail operates as a preemptive death sentence on every wealth action before the outcome can be seen. Together, these two fear thoughts form a closed loop that prevents both the arrival and the attempt. They cancel the delivery and simultaneously prevent the step toward the open door. And the sixth, "It is too late for me," adds a temporal dimension to the poverty mold, telling the substance that the time window for this person's supply has closed. That thought, held dominantly, presses a finality into the substance that no law can fulfill, because the law is responsive to the dominant thought. And the dominant thought of "too late" does not leave room for the law to open channels of provision. Here is the corrective thought that must replace every one of those fear signals the moment they are recognized rising in the dominant position. My dominant thought becomes form. Say it quietly. Say it with the full weight of the law behind it. My dominant thought becomes form. This means the fear signal is not the final authority. It is a thought. It is a mold being pressed into the substance. And it can be replaced right now with this one. My dominant thought becomes form. And the dominant thought being chosen is the wealth thought, the supply thought, the receiving thought, the thought that presses an entirely different mold into the same responsive substance and begins forming a different visible reality through the channels. The new mold opens. The correction practice is the daily spiritual work of the viewer who has understood this teaching and is committed to applying it with the precision Wattles described. It begins with catching the returning thought, not waiting for a moment of calm to examine the dominant thought from a safe distance, but noticing it in real time, in the moment when pressure rises and the fear thought reaches for dominance. In that moment, catch it. Notice the exact shape it is taking. Notice the specific fear sentence it is using. Notice the particular form of the poverty mold it is pressing into the substance at that precise moment of financial stress. This noticing, this catching, is itself an act of spiritual authority. It interrupts the automatic and places the viewer in the position of conscious choice. Then ask with genuine honesty, is this the mold I choose? Is the thought rising in this moment the thought I want forming my financial life? Is the fear sentence currently pressing itself into the formless substance, the sentence I have decided to instruct the invisible law with? If the answer is no, then the choice is fully available right now to press a different mold, not because the fear is gone, not because the visible circumstances have changed, simply because the viewer has identified the dominant thought being pressed and has made the conscious choice to press a different one. This question, is this the mold I choose, is one of the most powerful questions in the practical application of the law of dominant thought. Replace with the wealth thought, not with a desperate attempt to force positivity over genuine fear, but with the deliberate, practiced return to the chosen dominant thought, the one that was defined in the protocol, the one written down, the one felt in the body as the atmosphere of supply and receiving. Return to it now. Let it take the position in the dominant thought that the fear thought was occupying. Press it into the substance with the full weight of conscious intention. Say internally or aloud, I am supplied by Source. The channels are forming. The substance is responding to my dominant thought, and my dominant thought is wealth. Feel it for a moment. This is the instruction most viewers skip in their urgency to move past the discomfort of the correction and return to visible activity. But feeling is the carrier wave of the dominant thought. A thought without feeling presses lightly. A thought felt with genuine emotional quality presses deeply. So stop for a moment. Feel the wealth thought, not perform it. Feel it. Let the emotional atmosphere of supply, receiving, trust in Source, and openness to channels settle into the inner weather of this present moment. It does not need to last for hours. A genuine moment of felt wealth thought is worth more than an hour of mechanically repeated affirmation without feeling. Speak from it. The spoken word that follows the correction practice is the seal on the inner work. When the inner dominant thought has been caught, questioned, replaced with the wealth thought, and felt genuinely, the next spoken word should carry the quality of that correction rather than returning to the fear narrative. Speak one sentence from the wealth thought, not a lengthy declaration. One sentence that reflects the dominant thought now pressing itself into the substance. Something as simple as, the supply is forming, or Source is opening the channel, or my dominant thought becomes form. Let the spoken word be the external confirmation of the inner correction. Take one action from it. The correction practice is completed in the visible world by one faithful action aligned with the newly pressed wealth thought. Not a dramatic demonstration. One action. The email that is sent, the call that is made, the offer that is extended, the preparation that is done, the refusal to cancel what was planned because fear has risen. One action that embodies the wealth thought in the visible world and tells the invisible law that the correction was real, not merely internal, and that the viewer is moving from the dominant thought of wealth with the steady, certain way that Wattles described as the outward expression of the inward command. You are no longer the person who is at the mercy of dominant thoughts you did not choose. You have received a teaching that changes your relationship to your own inner life at the level of formation. You are now the guardian of dominant thought. That is the identity this teaching is asking you to step fully into. Not a person who manages circumstances. Not a person who waits for visible proof before choosing the inner impression. Not a person who affirms once and then returns to fear. A guardian. Someone who watches the returning thought with the authority of a person who understands what that thought is doing in the invisible and who intervenes faithfully and consistently every time the fear thought reaches for the dominant position. I guard the thought that forms my future. Let this be a living declaration, not a decorative statement. Every person who has understood this teaching and grasped the law of dominant thought knows that these words are not merely poetic. They are the precise description of the most essential spiritual work available. To guard the thought that forms the future is to take responsibility for the invisible cause while trusting the Source to shape the visible effect. It is to stop blaming circumstances and start examining the mold. It is to stop waiting for the world to change and start changing the dominant thought from which the world's next response must form. I do not let fear become the mold. This declaration is the specific application of the guardian identity to the daily practice of the correction. Fear will rise. The visible world will continue to present circumstances that invite the fear thought to take the dominant position. The bills will arrive. The channels will sometimes close. The pressure will sometimes peak. And in each of those moments, the viewer who holds the new financial identity will hear the fear thought rise and will say, consciously and with authority, I do not let fear become the mold. Not today, not in this moment. The mold is the wealth thought. The mold is the command. The mold is the dominant impression I have chosen and am choosing again right now. My thought becomes form through source-open channels. This is the identity statement that holds the full law in one sentence. It acknowledges the creative power of dominant thought. It acknowledges the source as the infinite supply behind every visible channel. It acknowledges that the channels are opened by an intelligence greater than the calculating mind of the viewer, and it acknowledges the faithfulness of the law. Thought becomes form. Not maybe, not sometimes, not when circumstances are favorable. Through the invisible mechanism of impression, atmosphere, expectation, perception, and action, dominant thought becomes the visible form of supply. This is the identity of the person who has understood and accepted the law, and it is the identity through which the law can operate at its full creative power. The new financial identity does not require perfection. This is essential to say, because the viewer who expects to hold the wealth thought perfectly, without any return of fear or any moment of doubt, will despair the first time the old thought rises and feel that the new identity has collapsed. It has not collapsed. Fear returning is not the loss of the new identity. It is the invitation to practice it. The guardian is not someone who never faces the intruder. The guardian is someone who consistently shows up when the intruder arrives. The new financial identity is built in the moments of returning, correcting, and choosing again. It does not require that the fear thought never appear. It requires that the viewer never stop returning to the wealth thought each time it does. The shift in identity is already in motion from the moment this teaching is genuinely received, not the moment when the visible world confirms it, not the moment when the bank account reflects it, the moment the viewer genuinely accepts the law and begins practicing the guardian role. From that moment, the dominant thought is being pressed with new intention. The mold is beginning to change. The interference is being actively reduced. The substance is receiving new instructions, and the channels through which the new form will arrive are already beginning to open in the invisible, exactly as the law says they must, in faithful response to the dominant thought that has been changed. Thought is formative. This is the foundational principle from which everything else in this teaching flows. Not thought as a decorative personal quirk, not thought as a pleasant inner experience with no external consequence. Thought is the primary creative force that impresses itself upon the formless substance from which all visible supply must emerge. The visible world is the effect. Thought is the cause. And the cause must be engaged with the same seriousness, the same deliberateness, and the same commitment that the viewer has historically given to the visible effects they have been trying to manage. Dominant thought matters most. Of all the thoughts that pass through the mind in a day, the week, the month, the dominant thought carries the most formative weight. The occasional hopeful thought contributes something. The dominant thought determines everything. The dominant thought shapes the emotional atmosphere, the expectation, the perceptual field, the quality of action, and ultimately the shape that the formless substance takes as visible supply. Everything else in this teaching serves one purpose: helping the viewer shift the dominance of their thought from fear to wealth, from poverty identity to source-supplied identity, from automatic returning fear to deliberately chosen returning wealth thought. Passing affirmation is not enough. This was the honest diagnosis at the center of the main open loop, and it must be held clearly as the teaching reaches integration. A 5-minute affirmation is a visiting thought. It touches the substance lightly and leaves. A 5-hour rehearsal of lack is a dominant thought. It presses deeply and holds. The practice called for by this teaching is not more affirmations. It is the building of genuine dominance in the wealth thought through consistent return, faithful feeling, stabilizing gratitude, and embodying action. Not more words, more dominance. Repeated fear impresses lack. The viewer who has spent years in financial difficulty and simultaneously tried to think positively has often not understood this principle. The problem was not the positive thoughts. The problem was the fear thoughts that occupied a disproportionate share of ours, emotional energy and automatic response. Those fear thoughts were the dominant impression. They were the mold, and they produced their form faithfully, regardless of the occasional positive thought that visited. The correction is not to add more positive thoughts. It is to reduce the dominance of the fear thought until the wealth thought holds the dominant position consistently. Chosen thought impresses wealth. This is the positive corollary. The thought deliberately chosen, consistently returned to, felt with genuine emotional quality, stabilized with gratitude, and embodied through aligned action, presses the wealth mold into the formless substance with increasing depth and clarity over time. The substance responds, the channels form, the perceptual field opens, the actions become aligned, and the supply that was always available from the infinite formless source begins to move through the newly shaped channels toward the viewer who has prepared the mold with faithful dominance. This is the certain way. This is the law. This is what thought becoming form means in the full precision of Wattles' teaching. Action embodies the thought. No principle in this teaching should be mistaken for an invitation to passive waiting. Action is the completion of the chain. It is the visible embodiment of the invisible command. Without it, the mold is prepared, but the substance is not poured. Without it, the wealth thought remains suspended between the invisible and the visible and cannot complete its formation into money. Walk through the nearest open door. Make the offer. Take the step. Act from the dominant thought of wealth with the steady, calm authority of a person who trusts the law and is willing to move before the evidence of supply is fully visible in the account. That movement is faith made visible, and it is the final element of the certain way. Here is what you need to understand about this teaching before you close it and return to your visible world. You do not need perfect thoughts to apply this law. You do not need to have achieved some elevated spiritual state in which fear never rises, and the dominant thought is serene without interruption. You need to return. That is the practice. That is the whole practice at its core, not the achievement of a permanently fear-free mind. The faithful, consistent, patient practice of returning to the dominant wealth thought each time the fear thought rises and takes a position it should not hold. The formless substance is not waiting for you to achieve perfection before it responds to your dominant thought. It is responding right now to whatever thought is actually dominant in this actual hour, which means that every sincere return to the wealth thought, in this hour, in this pressure moment, in this specific encounter with financial difficulty, is already pressing a different mold into the substance. The law does not require the past to have been different. It works from now. It works from the thought you are pressing right now. Every faithful return to the wealth thought from this moment forward is already changing the impression the substance is receiving. The viewer may have spent years in the false safety of the poverty thought without understanding that it was a mold rather than a truth. That time was not wasted in the economy of the spirit. It was the long preparation of a person who was being moved toward the moment when they would finally understand the law. And now, the understanding has arrived. The law is clear. The mold is in your hands. The substance is responsive. The channels are forming in the invisible right now in response to the dominant thought you have been pressing through this teaching. The question is not whether you deserve this understanding sooner. The question is what you will do with it from this moment forward. Every time the bill arrives and you return to the wealth thought, rather than surrendering to the fear thought, you are doing the most important financial work available. Every time the account drops and you press the supply mold rather than the scarcity mold, you are fulfilling the law. Every time the channel closes and you hold the dominant thought of source-supplied abundance rather than collapsing into the poverty identity, you are practicing the certain way in its fullest form. These moments of faithful return are the building blocks of a new dominant thought. And the new dominant thought is the mold through which invisible substance is already beginning to form toward a different and more complete visible supply. You are not starting over. You are starting from here, with this understanding, with this law, with the authority of a person who knows that the dominant thought pressing itself into the formless substance is the real first cause of the financial life, and who is now choosing, deliberately and with full awareness, to press a different mold. The wealth thought, the supply thought, the source-connected, channel-open, receiving-ready, gratitude-stabilized dominant thought that Wattles described as the foundation of the certain way. Press it, return to it, guard it, correct the fear thought, act from the wealth thought, and trust that the substance, responsive and faithful, is already forming around the new impression with the precision of a law that has never once failed to respond to the dominant thought it receives. The journey from the dominant fear thought to the dominant wealth thought does not happen in one inspired listening of a teaching. It happens in 10,000 small returns, in every correction, in every faithful choice of the wealth thought over the automatic fear, in every spoken word that reflects the command rather than the panic, in every action taken from the dominant thought of wealth before the visible world has confirmed it. Each of those small returns is not small. Each one deepens the mold. Each one strengthens the chain. Each one presses the impression one layer further into the formless substance that is waiting with infinite faithfulness and infinite supply to form around the dominant thought you are choosing to give it. Here is the challenge this teaching closes with, and it is specific, it is measurable, and it is spiritually serious. For 7 days, guard the thought you return to when money feels uncertain. That is the entire challenge, not a complete transformation of the dominant thought in 1 week. Simply this: when money feels uncertain, when the bill arrives, when the account drops, when the channel closes, notice the returning thought. See it clearly, name it honestly, and then make the deliberate choice to return to the wealth thought you defined in this teaching, rather than surrendering the dominant position to the fear thought. 7 days. 7 days of consistent, faithful, pressure-tested practice of choosing the mold. This is a real practice, not a ceremonial gesture. The 7 days will contain actual financial pressure. They will contain moments when the fear thought rises with genuine force, and the visible world presents its most convincing arguments for the poverty mold. The challenge is not to avoid those moments. It is to meet them with the correction practice, with the guardian identity, with the quiet authority of a person who now understands what thought is doing in the invisible, and who refuses to allow fear to set the mold for the next season of supply. Each day you complete the practice, you are pressing the wealth mold one layer deeper into the formless substance. By the 7th day, the new dominant thought will be more established than it was on the first. That is the guaranteed result of faithful return. During these 7 days, return to the declaration that anchors this teaching. My dominant thought becomes form. When the fear thought rises, speak that declaration quietly, and then press the wealth thought back into the dominant position. When the visible world invites panic, hold the supply thought and speak the declaration. When the old returning thought attempts to reclaim its familiar territory, remember the false safety trap. Remember that familiar is not true. Remember that the wealth thought will feel strange until repetition makes it home. And return to it one more time with the patient authority of a person who knows the law and is applying it with precision. The 7-day challenge is not the end of the practice. It is the beginning of the dominance shift. After 7 days of faithful return, the wealth thought will have more momentum behind it than before. The correction will be more natural. The return will be faster. The familiarity will have begun to build. Continue past the 7 days. Continue through the weeks and the months until the dominant thought is genuinely, automatically, and effortlessly the wealth thought that the viewer has chosen as the formation of their financial life. The law will confirm it. The substance will respond to it. The channels will form in alignment with it. And the supply that arrives will carry the shape of the mold that was pressed with such faithful, patient, persistent dominance. In the comments below this teaching, write the dominant wealth thought you are choosing. Write the specific sentence that is becoming your wealth mold. Write it as an act of decision. Write it as the declaration that a person makes when they understand the law and are committing to practice it with the precision the law requires. Write it as a seal on the inner work this teaching has begun. Your comment is not simply engagement with a video. It is the external voice of an internal command. It is the spoken word aligned with the dominant thought. It is the first visible action taken from the new mold you are pressing into the formless substance. Write it. Let it be real. If this teaching has given you something you have been searching for, something that goes deeper than ordinary prosperity content and speaks to the hidden interior cause of visible financial conditions, then stay with the Master's legacy. There are more teachings coming from this channel, each one drawing from the same ancient well of spiritual law and translated for the person who is genuinely ready for the precision of the Masters. Subscribe if you have not yet. Leave a comment that speaks your wealth thought into the visible world. Share this teaching with the person in your life who is fighting financial fear with visible strategies that have not addressed the invisible cause. Now, return to the place where this teaching began. There was a thought you were returning to before this video started, a thought that was already waiting for you when the bill arrived, a thought that rose without invitation, when the account dropped. That thought was not a private emotional reaction. That thought was pressing a mold into the formless substance and shaping the channels through which your supply was or was not flowing. You may not have known that. You may have believed that your thoughts were weak, private, and irrelevant to the visible financial world. Wattles said otherwise, and now you know otherwise. The thought you return to under pressure is the real creative instruction being sent to the invisible substance, not the affirmation you speak at your best, not the vision you hold in an inspired moment. The returning thought under pressure, that is the mold. That is what the formless substance has been responding to. That is what has been shaping your channels, your expectations, your perceptions, your actions, and the visible financial life that has emerged from all of those invisible causes. You now have a name for it. You have a law for it. You have a practice for it. The guardian identity is yours. The correction practice is yours. The wealth thought is yours to define and yours to press. From this day forward, every moment of financial pressure is a practice opportunity. Every arrival of the fear thought is a summons to return to the wealth thought and press the right mold one more time. Every bill is a test of which thought is genuinely dominant. Every closed channel is an invitation to trust that Source sees more channels than the mind can calculate, and that the dominant thought of supply is already opening the next one. Every unexpected provision is confirmation that the law is operating faithfully in response to the mold being pressed. The law is not selective. It is not slow when the impression is clear. It is not limited by any visible circumstance. It is responsive to the dominant thought, always, faithfully, without exception. Guard the thought because the thought is not empty. It is the mold through which invisible substance begins to become money.